Okay, good morning, councillors. Good morning, officers. Welcome to this last Economy and Development Select Committee before the summer break. There's quite a bit on the agenda today, and hopefully we'll get through it all. Although I am conscious there's another Select Committee meeting this afternoon. So depending on where we are at about 1 o'clock-ish, we might look to defer, but some items. But hopefully we'll get through the business. So before we go into the items on the agenda, I'm conscious there's quite a few members or additional members who are not members of this committee, and there's a number of officers here today. So perhaps for those outside of this building, if we just do a little introduction. So my name's Councillor Paul Pavia, and I'm chair of this committee.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Wendy Barnard, Democratic Services.
Richard Simpkins, Business Manager for Tourism, Leisure and Culture and Youth. I don't think that's working.
Ian Saunders, Head of Tourism, Leisure, Culture and Youth.
Bob Greenland, Cabinet Responsibility for Leisure, etc.
Jez Becker, Committee Member.
Alan Davis, Vice Chair of the Committee.
Brian Strong, Member.
David Dovey, Member of this Committee.
Matt Feekins, Member of the Committee.
Richard Roden, Member of the Committee.
Tim Lewis, Events and Projects.
Dave Loader, Central Finance.
Kath Fallon, Head of Enterprise and Community Development.
Michael Jordan, Youth Enterprise.
Louise Wills, Youth Enterprise.
Hannah Jones, Youth Enterprise.
Councillor Val Smith, Observing.
Councillor Tony Dewstow, Member of the Call-In for this particular item.
Councillor Evan, Member of West Ends, ward in Caldicott, and one of the call-ins.
Councillor Jim Higginson, Member of a 7 ward in Caldicott, and a signatory to the call-in.
And we've got Councillor Armand Watts of Thornmore Ward in Chepstow. He's just having a few computer problems, which hopefully will be resolved. So the first item on the agenda, item 1.1, is to consider a call-in relating to the Cabinet decision dated the 4th of July 2018 regarding restructure of attractions. Now, 1.1 to 1.4, it's all one item, although obviously the documentation supports the call-in. There's a very prescripted procedure about this, and I think Hazel's just going to outline what that is for us. Thank you, Hazel.
Some of you will be familiar with call-ins, but for members of the public and those members that call-ins are new, I'll just confirm the process that we're going to apply this morning, which is the Council's call-in procedure, which is outlined in our Constitution. So the purpose today of the call-in is to consider the appropriateness of a decision that's already been taken by the Executive, a decision that has effectively been called in by members of the Economy and Development Select Committee. So just to confirm, the committee is not able to make a decision itself, but having followed the Council's call-in procedure can do one of 3 things. The first is to accept the Cabinet's decision. The second is to refer the matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration, but with reasons. And the third would be to refer the matter to full Council. So the call-in procedure allows for the members who requested the decision to be called in first, outlining the reasons for calling in the decision. The Cabinet member will then be invited to respond, following which officers can respond. The Chair will then ask Select Committee members to comment if they wish to do so, and then there'll be an opportunity for any other elected members to ask questions prior to the committee considering the way forward. And just to confirm that only members of the Select Committee can vote on the course of action proposed.
Okay, thank you, Hazel. Everyone clear on that? Yeah. Okay, so if I take the members who've requested the call in first, so if I take the probably the back row, Tony first, then David, then Jim, and then Alan, and then we'll move to they're the cabinet member responsible. So, Tony, do you want to start?
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, Chair. And first of all, are we live streamed or are we recorded? Live streamed. Okay, thank you. I noted the cabinet decision of July the 4th, which was to move forward the restructuring of the attractions based on the report here. I felt some concerns about the actual report. One, I believe that it came before cabinet without any pre-scrutiny. It's a very not major decision, but it is a move away from what we was expecting, or what I was expecting in the outturn to ADM. This is obviously, it's not part of the ADM, but is a precursor to the ADM. So it wasn't listed as a way forward in terms of the cabinet papers. It was passed through. So that is my one concern. Secondly, I feel that there's an amount of vagueness within the report. There's some ifs and some buts, but the top and bottom of it is that the cost of the change would be very similar, if not the same as the present cost at the moment, and doesn't really show much information as to how those costs are determined on the basis that there are 11 jobs going, as far as I can see, with a few being created, and some thoughts in there that some of these jobs will be maybe put people at redundancy. I'm not sure. You say on the papers that the redundancy costs or the costs are not really available at the moment, but the process will be conducted to recruit positions in these positions. I feel that to bring a paper to take a paper to cabinet and then expect it to go through without any structural costs on what there could well be for redundancy, which would come out of the redundancy pot of Monmouthshire County Council. Which says to me that had this gone forward to the ADM without any changes, somebody else would have been responsible for the costs. It says on 5.3, it's not possible at this stage to give an accurate estimation of costs associated with severance from employment. If any, given that there are processes to go through, is not envisaged as will be a significant cost. Well, I think that on the basis of what I've read on the papers, that this cost could well be over the 10,000 limit, which we use as a precursor to bring call in, and that is one of the reasons why I brought it to. I was one of the signatories to try and bring it to this committee to look at that. I'll leave my introduction then and allow the other members of the call in to add their thoughts, because I think that we may come back to some questions later on.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Leeson. Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chair. The concern I got is that it went to Cabinet, they made their decision, they've come back to the officers, and I feel that there will be redundancies, and these people who could be made redundant, was they aware of this before this ever come to council or to cabinet, or have they found out now through the press and this calling? Because if that's the case, that is not the proper procedure. The second thing is, have the cost of redundancies been added into the amount of money that's been set aside for this procedure to go ahead? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Higginson?
Yeah, thank you. The issue I have is that there's no defined costs on this situation, and I think that there's the cost of the new structure, but based on anticipated 18-19 pay rates at the top of the scale and so on. But I'm concerned that there's no, I don't see in there where the accurate defined costs are in evidence.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Davis?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I have a number of questions. One of them is about the timing of this went to Cabinet and the fact that we didn't have the advanced Cabinet notices in time to be aware that this was coming before Cabinet. And I would suggest that anything that involves making people redundant, we are talking about people's livelihoods here, should be adequately scrutinised and not just pushed through Cabinet without anybody having the chance to discuss it. What I'm unclear about, having looked at this for quite some considerable time and looking at the figures that have been presented, if my maths is right, then attractions over the last 5 years have overspent by £853,443 on their budget. That doesn't include the £180,000 loss for the event at Carlingford Castle. So if you add that, it's over £1 million overspent. You know. So one can see the need for change in the way these things are run. What I'm not seeing is the rationale behind those changes, and I'm failing to see where any financial advantage comes from it. Because normally, if one is in business and we're going to make a business case for changes, you would be looking at some sort of financial advantage or some advantage in terms of the quality of the product you're producing. I mean, this chap is going to cover all 4 sites is going to be a busy guy, isn't he? And there's nothing in there about who's going to cover for sickness, who's going to cover for holidays, what are the implications for the stress on the staff that are going to be involved. And one of the questions I really have is, why are we doing this now? I understand that ADM is going to start in December. We'll have a board in position then where all of these things can be discussed, and we'll have some people there with commercial expertise, I suggest. And I'm just not seeing the rationale for the changes and the justification for it. We should have had time, in my opinion, to discuss this. I think it should have come to us before. You know, if there are valid reasons and people can demonstrate that it's going to make a significant difference to the operation now, then please tell us, because I'm not seeing it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Davis. Can I just ask Councillor Evans, can you just put your microphone off, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a number of issues here. So I'll just quickly sum up some of those. Why now? Why is this decision being brought now ahead of the ADM implementation? What's the rationale for change? And what is the financial advantage? There's obviously issues around cost, redundancy costs being one of them. Were staff who will be affected, were they aware of this process ahead of any decision? Was there due consultation? And the other issue in terms of process, and was there sufficient cabinet notice on the forward work programme, which I think is a fair question. We're quite studious as a committee in terms of looking at the cabinet forward work programme. If there's any issues there, we feel that need further consideration. You know, we like to call them in and have a look at them before any decision is made. So those are the sort of summing up points really of the key issues raised by the councillors who've called in. I'll ask now the cabinet member to respond. So, Councillor Greenland.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, let me say that this decision is not directly associated with the ADM, because we haven't yet made a council decision that we are going to go to an ADM. That is for later. It is for a full council decision about whether we are to move to that position. The reason for this change is because we need a better management structure than we have at the moment. And this would have come whether or not we were talking about the ADM or not. Having said that, it has been brought at this time because actually I believe that if we are going to make the decision to move to an ADM, we should hand that over in the best possible condition that it is and with the right management structure in place. This new ADM, if it comes about, is going to have an awful lot of work to do. And if we recognise that the existing management structure was not fit for purpose, then I believe that the correct thing to do is to change it now to give the ADM the best possible start that it could have. But let me be quite clear, this decision or this change would have been coming along anyway. It is just that we want it to take effect and to bed down before we get to the point at which Council makes the final decision about whether or not we are going into an ADM. Let me also just clear up a couple of other points. When we're looking at redundancies at all, the first thing we do is to talk privately to those who could be affected by that decision. That's the very first thing that managers do if they are going to make proposals before it comes to Cabinet, before anything else. Those affected will be consulted on what is going forward. So there's no question that this could have come as a surprise to any officers that might be affected. Looking at the reasons for the call-in, the first one is that it could be above the £10,000 threshold. Yes, it probably could be. I agree entirely. But as with any of these situations, we cannot know exactly what the cost of the redundancies are going to be, because that is a matter of who takes what jobs in the restructure, how long they've been with the council, etc. It is impossible in any of these cases to give an accurate figure of what, well, except in a very simple case where you've got one perhaps, but in a restructure of this sort, it's impossible to give an accurate figure of what those redundancy payments might be. The other thing which I want to say is that this council makes decisions on a very regular basis. There are, as we know, every 2 weeks, individual cabinet member decisions which are taken. It is impossible to expect that every one of those decisions will go to pre-scrutiny. I am a strong believer in pre-scrutiny decisions. I think it is the way that we're doing it in this council is very good. But we cannot possibly have a system, in my view, which will enable every single decision that is taken by a cabinet member or a cabinet decision to go before pre-scrutiny. We would clog up the system so much that actually the running of this council would become almost impossible. And we, in this case, have exactly the process. We're not trying to cut out any members at all, because we do already have in process in place a process which will allow any member to challenge any decision that is ever taken. And it's this process of call-in. And if members feel that that decision is wrong, then you have the ability, as we've proven from today, to come forward and to challenge that decision. But if you want to move the process, and you may take the view that the process at the moment is wrong and that everything should come for pre-scrutiny, I wouldn't agree with you. But if you believe that that is what we should be doing, then the correct procedure, I would suggest to you, is that we will need a change in our constitution, which should come forward as through a motion from members to council. But at the moment, we have a process which this has followed absolutely, which takes a decision and which then opens it up for members to challenge in the way that you've done. One of the things that local government was always criticised for is the amount of time that it takes to make decisions. And those of you who have been involved in commercial businesses will know that if you take a decision today, you can implement it tomorrow. Now, the existing process that we have in this council is if you take a decision today, You have to go out to consultation for 2 or 3 weeks. Then eventually it gets put on an agenda. The quickest process is through individual cabinet member. But even that takes 2 weeks to get onto the system. You then have the decision made, and then you have 10 days in which people can call it in. Huge amount of time is taken before you can actually implement a decision. If you now want to also put a process in where every decision before it's taken by a cabinet member or cabinet is going to have to go to a select committee, you will have a council that is almost at a standstill. And I believe that this existing system that we've got through call-in is the better one. But if you believe otherwise, and of course you're quite entitled to do, then I would suggest the correct way of dealing with that is through a change in the Constitution, which should come through a motion to council. Moving on to the other reasons that we've heard now, I've already dealt with the vagueness in the costs of the redundancy. It's impossible to give that more accuracy than we've had. I've dealt with the timing of the redundancy, and in terms of financial advantage, there is no financial advantage in doing this. There's no savings to be made by doing this. But what it is putting a better management structure in place to manage these attractions. That's what it's all about, really, getting a better management structure in place. For that reason, I believe that we've reached the right decision. I'm not sure that I've heard any alternative proposals to this decision, whether you would change it in any way. What I think I've heard is challenges to the process, which you're quite entitled to make. But as I say before, there's a way to deal with the process if you consider that it's not right. And at that point, Chair, I'll just perhaps hand over to officers who might like to pick up anything else.
Ian, just before you comment, I welcome the comments from the cabinet member about pre-decision scrutiny. It is an important function. However, I don't think that's what the call-in members were quibbling about in terms of changing the constitution and changing process. It's about following process that's already in place, and I think this particular decision should have been flagged up on the forward work planner ahead of time. When we looked at our previous committee meeting before the last one, because it was a special meeting last one, it wasn't on the forward work programme, so we had no idea it was coming. So it's important that we know these decisions are coming. So if committee members are so minded, that we can have a look at pre-decision scrutiny. We've got a lot of work streams in place, a lot of outside workshops working on a number of different themes. We've got plenty on our plate already. We wouldn't necessarily pull in every decision and pour over it for no reason. We do it because we feel there's a purpose to it. I'm not going to open it out to questions at this stage. There is a process to follow. The cabinet member can come back before I go to the officer, and then I'll open it up to the select committee members.
Yes, just to reiterate, actually the very first thing that Councillor Easton said was that there was no pre-scrutiny. That was his very first remark that he made. But again, I would point out that there are decisions that come through the council process that are timely, that simply do not have the time to be put forward for pre-scrutiny every time. Where we can, we like to do that. The whole purpose of having a what's it called, a forward work programme is to try and enable that. But there are some things that happen in the running of any organisation which don't fit in with actually being able to put that in months ahead. And this was one of those decisions that was coming forward because of the way that the attractions were running. The decision to actually move them to a different management structure needed to be taken pretty quickly. And certainly, as I said at the beginning, we wanted to get this decision through and implemented before the council made a decision on the final ADM, so that if the decision was taken by council that it should move to the ADM, it was in as good a position moving forward as it could have been.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Greenland. Ian, would you like to, and officers, would you like to come back on any additional points and add any technical clarity to some of the points that the call-in members have raised?
Okay, good morning, members. Just to confirm that what Councillor Greenland commented on, we would definitely be doing this structure regardless of ADM. The reason, the why now reason, is because of some of the issues on how long the ADM has been taken to put in place. Clearly, you know, we were expecting the ADM to possibly be live by now. When we talked 2.5, 3 years ago, we came to members and said, there is a lot of stress in the workplace in these attractions. They are very stretched. The teams are, a lot of honorariums are in place. There's been management moving from place to place. And there's been a lot of reasons why it's been a very difficult time for these services. And myself and Richard here have also found that time difficult, because running any service, the one thing you do want is to protect your staff and make sure that they're motivated, which they are. They are very passionate people. They're very committed, and they're out there now. You know, Chepstow TIC will be welcoming coaches as we're sitting here. Old Station will be preparing for walkers and cyclists to come in. I know Caldicott Castle is preparing for V-dubs on the weekend, and Shire Hall is undergoing refurbishments at the moment, and the team are doing brilliant just to keep those services going. The why now, though, is because we're at a stage where we've clearly at capacity out there with what they're trying to keep things going at. And we need to start thinking, we've been, you know, Councillor Davis and others have said, have you got the right commercial model? Are you looking in the right way at these attractions? And I think this structure goes some way to alleviate some of those issues by putting a group manager, whether it's a he or a she. You know, we need someone who's going to come in and look at things in a different way, a more collective way on these services. The attractions, by the very nature of the history of them, you can see in the report they've been overspending. It's been very difficult to keep control of the way that those overspends have been going on. We've reported them through the correct financial processes at each year, but every year we've been in a situation where at the start of the year we know we'll be under extreme pressure, especially in the castle, Caldicott Castle. I think the Tourist Information Centre has had a very difficult history over the past few years. We've been open and we've been closed. We've been looking for different ways of delivering that service. I think this is a model that will actually give it some sustainability and grow it. And I think, you know, working with the team down there, there's some good plans there on how to do that. But again, we've been talking to you about the difficulties of casual contracts and the difficulties of some of the things that you would expect us not to be doing. Well, this restructure will ensure that people have got contracts, people are in a place where, you know, the management is in place, the right structures. Richard has been line manager of these attractions, and clearly Richard's job has expanded, and he's doing massive projects like the Monmouth Pool. And clearly, if this wasn't about money, then we'd have a manager on every site. Clearly we would. Why wouldn't we? But we've got to cut our coat according to our cloth, and we have not got enough money in the budget to put a manager on every site. Similar structures in place across leisure, where we've got managers across centres, and we are working now hard with the attractions teams to really focus on the rotas, talking with those brilliant teams, and we're making sure that consultation is in place, just to put that those fears away. The consultation process was long. We went out to sites, we invited managers in, we spoke to the teams in groups and individually. And that was long before the paper was due to go out. So I think we have done those bits of process. I think the other thing that I'd like to bring into this is some of the concerns that have been picked up in recent audits about different processes on different sites. And this will give us an opportunity to look at these 4 together and put in a similar process across, certainly for things like catering and other offers, and get more continuity across these services. I think also the group manager will be looking in a more commercial way on these services. I heard the comments about sickness and issues. Well, what happens now? What happens now is a manager who is absolutely out on their feet has to go back and cover. And it is very difficult out there. We've got managers racking up loo time, managers, so I think this opportunity of this structure addresses some of those concerns. It puts in a layer of operational management, which is the engine to these services. We have more duty staff that are really customer focused. And I think, as Councillor Greenland said, I have got a lot of experience in this field. I can't see a different way of doing it. If there's other opportunities out there or more money coming in, then we would probably look at it a different way, but that's not where we are. We're trying to address a point in time for Monmouthshire County Council for these attractions.
Okay, thanks Ian. I'll open it out now to select committee members to comment. Do select committee members want to? Councillor Davis?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, just to make the point, I don't think anybody on this committee is suggesting that we call in every decision that's ever made in the council, far from it. But I think when you have a topic which involves a major change in management structure and also has some redundancies involved, and I would suggest that is something that people would want to look at very closely and should do. You get no argument from me about that something needs to be done. Because you only have to look at the figures, don't you, to see that. And I have read these documents. If you look at the revenue and capital monitoring data, you will see that the figures on there look pretty disastrous as well. Caldecott Castle, 101,000 overspend, Old Station 25, Shire Hall 30, Museums 40, £278,000 overspent. So there is no doubt that we have to do something, and Bob will know that I'm one of those people who don't like the time it takes to have decisions here, but I think there are some things, and I think this is one of them, talking about what we're talking about here, that perhaps, some things do need to be scrutinised more closely than others, perhaps. I understand why you want to change the structure. I mean, one could argue, why haven't we looked at this before? Because we've continually lost money over 5 years and I'm going to lose money again this year. Having a more commercial outlook, definitely the way to go. But what are your aspirations in terms of turning those figures around? Is this structure going to make any contribution to that? That's the question at the end of the day. There's no point in changing the management structure for the sake of changing the management structure. We need to make it so that we make improvements in the performance of the business or whatever. So, I mean, I'm not seeing that in the document. That you expect an increase in wedding revenue from you're appointing somebody who's going to specifically there to take care of weddings. So what are you expecting the return on our investment? That's what I'm not seeing in this document. And I think to justify making people redundant, we need to see what the justifications are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Armand, do you want to speak?
Just on that, really. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. So. We don't know what the figure is, but we surely must know the amount of people. And I'm struggling to, so we've been told for years and years and years, it's customer based, we get all the same old kind of spiel, if you like, forgive me, that, the authority's doing really well, it's a good service, it's making money, but next year it's going to be better next year. And then basically it's a show of hands here, just before we go into this, we're finding now it's an absolute disaster financially, and yet the expectation is that we're going to do better with less people. Now, I don't understand that, Chair.
Okay. Any other committee members want to say anything on this particular issue? No. Mark, you've indicated to speak. Is it a point of just to clarify what was said earlier by Ian?
Yeah, it's just a helpful point from a Section 151 point of view that might help members. I mean, recognising that's to do with governance and stewardship, and we've heard a lot about process this morning. Actually, the process adopted is no different than any other process for any redundancies at the moment. Members might recall that actually the usual process for redundancy reports is a two-stage process, one which actually recommends the need for re-engineering of services and change. And you've heard this morning that it's unusual to prejudge the reappointment process for people that are actually applying for some of those revised jobs. And obviously people's redundancies amount are specific to the individual in terms of how long a service they've got and what they're currently being paid at the moment. So what we normally advise, and what we've advised in this case, is that the report includes a ballpark so that members can understand the consequence of it. And if it's outside of that ballpark, it's normal for officers to have to come back either through the finance report subsequently, because you'll appreciate the selects get information through that fashion, or explicitly through a report to Cabinet that says the consequence of the decision that has been reached is X. The other aspect I think I probably want to highlight to you, I can understand the members considering why it was brought to you. I mean, insofar as it's been explained that in the past this area of the business has struggled with its financial challenge, and actually the revised structure doesn't seem to alter that in terms of the economy of the structure, but it perhaps does give the opportunity for those staff to actually be more flexible and more commercial going forward. I don't think councillors should be too precious about advantaging the ADM service. It would be counterintuitive if members wish to send it forward in a fashion that isn't robust and give it the best chance to succeed. But I do understand the nervousness that actually a lot of the presentations provided by ADM to date have been largely from what's of benefit to tourism, leisure and culture, and perhaps over the next couple of months we'll get more information to share with you at the October date around what the effect will be on the council from this.
Okay, thanks Mark, that was helpful. Councillor Eason?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's going back to Councillor Green's comments about my words pre-scrutiny. I won't talk like President Trump the other day, whether it would or wouldn't. I won't go into that. But this came before Council on June the 6th as a matter for Cabinet. And if you're doing your job as a county councillor, you will see these, as well as the forward work programme, you will see these coming up as matters of debate for Cabinet. I saw this on June the 6th, and I've seen every Cabinet meeting since then on what is there. And in particular, you've got an independent Cabinet member decisions on some matters coming up next week. One of them might give some concern. It's a confidential matter, but I won't mention it there, but it might give some concern. So I do read the papers. I do know what's coming forward, but this came forward as a member for a decision for Cabinet, not a pre-scrutiny decision. I think there's an opportunity for the Directorate to bring this to your committee, Chair. There's been ample opportunity since June the 6th, and it could have gone through the scrutiny process quite clearly, what we're doing now, and we could have avoided the position of a call-in. So I do read the papers. I think most members read the papers. If you don't read the papers, you don't have the right to say that you don't know things are happening. Well, I do know they're happening. And as I say, there's an independent Cabinet member decision this week. One might cause some concern. It's to do with home care fees, but that's another matter.
Okay. Any other members of the committee want to speak now? No. Okay, so in terms of the advice to proceed, we have to consider a way forward now on this, and there's 3 courses of action. One is to accept the Cabinet's decision, the original decision, or to refer the matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration with reasons. We have to ensure there's rationale for that. Or we refer the matter back to Council for consideration. Just to clarify, Hazel, there's not a fourth in terms of it doesn't come. We can't request it to come to us. It has to go back to Council. Okay. So just to sum up what was said by the Cabinet member and officers, the decision was taken because it's not directly related to the ADM. That decision still is to be formally made by full council. There is a need for a better management structure, and this particular layer of operational management was laid out by Ian, and why a group manager was needed. And the reason for that is to ensure that there is the best possible structure to hand over to a new model if that is the decision of full council. Staff members were consulted, and I think Ian laid that out as well in terms of how robust it was as a process. The issue of redundancy costs were raised, and I think while it's not known at this stage, I think Mark's point was quite helpful in terms of a ballpark figure was looked at, and the likelihood is that will probably be over 10k, but we won't know until that process is gone through. So it's just asking cabinet members now how you would like to proceed. So again, it's accept the cabinet's decision, further matter back to the cabinet for reconsideration with reasons, or refer the matter back to full council. Councillor Feakins.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to proceed. I recommend that we accept the Cabinet's decision.
Okay. Do we need a second on that, Hazel, or do we go for a vote? Is there any alternatives?
I'd like to proceed that we go forward and take it to full council because, some of the questions haven't been...
Microphone, sorry.
Sorry. I'd like to proceed that we take it back to full council on the grounds that some of the answers were still unclear, particularly about, I'm worried about staff, I'm worried about the impact it has on some of the unions, and so you can nod your head, but I don't feel...
Yeah. Can you just stick to your point, please, Councillor
That's it. So, I am really,
yeah.
Just trying
okay.
to...
Right. Yeah, go on, Ian.
Can I just say this has been a long, protracted issue. I can't emphasise enough how important it is to continue on this way forward. To delay this anymore really is going to cause further, shall we say, unrest, and not with managers, with teams that want to just get on and deliver the service, and they do need support. By putting it back to council, you are delaying again a process that needs to be enacted quickly. And I can't keep saying enough how long, I have said this before in joint selects over the last talking about ADM and how the process has been going on, and it has been going on, and it's still going on. And we do need some resolution to this structure on the attractions.
If I can come back on that, Chair, I don't want to give a tip.
Go on briefly.
But, the reality is, if there was a show of hands and we had all this detail, there wouldn't have been a call-in. The members have got a job to scrutinise. We're democratically elected. So that's why we are where we are. If you, with respect to you, if you'd done your homework to begin with and it was an open show of hands, we wouldn't be. I take into account all the points that you make, but we've got a job to do, and that's effectively what we're doing. So I'm sorry about that, Ian, if you don't like it.
Okay, there's two proposals on the table. Councillor Feakins proposed that the cabinet decision be accepted. Can I have a show of hands for that, please, from the Select Committee? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that's 6. And those against? Councillor Watts, Councillor Davis, are you? Oh, you voted for. Sorry, 6. There we are. 6. That's passed. Then that we accept the cabinet's decision. So thank you very much. Thank you for all those members who called in this particular decision. Thank you, officers, and thank you, Councillor Greenland. We'll move on now to the agenda as initially itemed, and I'll call on the other officers to come to the front table. Thank you. Okay, if we move on to the substantial agenda now. Item 2, apologies for absence. There are apologies, Wendy? I don't think there are there?
Sorry, no apologies for
No,
absence.
I think we're all here. Item 3 then, declarations of interest. Anyone got any declarations at this stage? No. Okay. Item 4, to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. That was not the special meeting last week, but it was the meeting in June. Everyone happy to proceed? Yeah. Thank you. It was proposed by Councillor Dovey and seconded by Councillor Strong. Item number 5, public open forum. I can't see any members of the public here this morning, so that opportunity is not going to be taken. So item number 6 then is the Youth Enterprise European Social Fund programmes, so Inspire to Achieve and Inspire to Work extension. And you, Kath, are you going to lead on this? Do an introduction and that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've been before this committee previously prior to Cabinet approval for the implementation of the Inspire to Achieve and Inspire to Work programmes, which look to help sustain the reduction in our not engaged in education, employment or training students. We've got an opportunity now to extend this programme to 2022, which will enable us to potentially reduce the risk of nigh on 500 young people becoming at risk of NEET in the next 4 years. So Hannah will talk you through the report, and then we've got colleagues here who can pick up additional questions if needed.
Thank you, Kath. So yeah, the report here is to present to you about the extension for the Inspire to Achieve, Inspire to Work programmes. It's for you to consider the additional funding that's required for match, for the investor redesign reserves, and for a baseline consideration as well. Picking up on the key points, as Cass said, our Inspire to Achieve project is around preventing young people becoming NEET in school. We offer a level 2 qualification in personal social development and supporting them then into further education, training or employment. And Inspire to Work works for young people who are unemployed, offering them further qualifications and employability support with the main outcome of employment. As detailed in the report in key issues, you can see the existing budget and match funding at the beginning of the projects. And in terms of where it sits in terms of a national framework, it's within the Welsh Government Youth Engagement Progression Framework, which has been in place since 2013. Looking at options for appraisal, obviously, as Cass said, if we didn't take the extension forward, there is a risk of young people becoming NEET, and there is a concern for us as a local authority and a team. We've evaluated, we've carried out evaluation, which you'll see in Appendix 1, and we would like to come back on an annual basis to this committee to report on our performance on both projects. It's really important that we have set targets for both projects, and both projects are regional projects, which Newport City Council is the lead on. So it's really important that we come back and give you feedback in terms of our performance. And you'll see from Appendix 3, we'll share with you the targets that have been set now for the next 3 years. As alluded to, we are looking for a total of 118,000 over the lifetime of both projects. We do have grants that come into the authority which we can use as match funding, and we have a grant that comes in from European funding, and we can offset that with some indirect costs as well as our core budget. But we would struggle to take the extension forward within the lifetime of the project with our existing resources. I think that's all I want to say, actually. So any questions?
Any questions then, Councillor Feakins?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I'm very much in favour of the programmes. Just wanted to know how we're covered, or to make sure we've got the position hedged off in case the European Social Fund is no longer coming after next January, or how that mechanism is going to affect if we drop out of Europe on a cliff edge, which is again ever more likely. What do we do? How is that fund ring fenced from them to us? And if it doesn't happen and it doesn't come to us, have we got somewhere along the line to make that provision within our own budgets?
Okay, thank you. As you can see from the report, the lifetime of this project is to 2023. So, it is a good lifetime currently. We have had further discussions with Newport, our lead, who are liaising with WEFO, which is the European Funding Office. So it is looking quite promising. I know it's, concerning what's going on with Brexit and currently at the moment, but from what we are hearing, it is quite favourable, really.
And thank you. Only a point of clarification then. The funding that comes in, does that come in as one block of fund at the front end of the scheme, and therefore we don't have to worry about it moving forward?
We submit quarterly claims, so it comes in on a quarterly basis. So the budget has been projected for the lifetime of the project, and then we claim it on a quarterly basis. And we meet with Newport regularly, and they monitor our outcomes. So it's very much as a red, amber, green in terms of our performance. We're currently green for both projects, which is fantastic for us, really. So.
Just really to add that in terms of the Inspire to Achieve and Inspire to Work programmes, we also have the Rural Development Programme, which is also European funded. We're having no indications at this present time that the current European programme is actually going to be cut back in any way, shape or form. So we were going with what sort of colleagues in WEFO are informing us. It's the post 2022 programmes that are the biggest issue at the minute, not what we've got in the plan. So the government is committed to actually following these programmes through. Where we've had in the past is something called N+2, because there's always a delay in the programmes actually coming online. They add on at the end of the programme, and there's this big flurry for us to take on additional activity. That is less likely at this stage. So we're just working with the intelligence that we have at the moment, as is probably the whole UK government at this moment in time.
Yeah, go on. Councillor Figgins.
Thank you, Chair. I hear exactly what you're saying, and the risk factor I see, just only, and it might be well ill-informed, but if we left Europe without a deal, I can see that we wouldn't have any funding after that. Not saying that we can do everything, and my fear would be then that we'd have programmes in play that we want to make sure are in play, and we wouldn't want to stop. So my thinking would be that we probably should be considering a risk factor within our business model for next year's budget, just as an element, just in case we did have a cliff edge situation, and all of a sudden European funding stopped after the 29th of March next year, and we would have something in our own budgets just to shore this back up. That would all be.
Yeah, I take your point. There is something called the UK Share Prosperity Fund, which would look to replace European funded programmes. But again, there's no detail for that at the moment. But you're right to raise the risk factor, yeah.
Councillor Davis?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Fully support the initiative, obviously, and I think all members would do that. Speaking my language when you're talking about targets and evaluation, I like that. I notice, perhaps I misread, but it says 2 out of the 4 indicators achieved, which means there's 2 that weren't achieved. So what actions are you putting in place to address that shortfall in plan, as it were?
Which page is that, please?
You've got reduced risk of need, 2 out of 4 indicators achieved, attainment, attendance, behaviour and well-being.
What page is that?
Okay.
Appendix 4.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. This is for us to claim the outcome. So where it says 2 out of 4, that's the minimum. So we strive to get the 4 out of 4 really in terms of claiming that outcome.
What I was asking is what new initiatives you put in place to raise that performance then?
Well, we continue to look at, obviously it's a very bespoke programme, looking at what those pressure points are for young people. So how can we support them? In terms of attendance, some young people find it difficult to go and get their mark in their form. So they'll go to the worker in the morning and have their mark and have some time to have a chat about how things have been going on. So kind of looking at that more kind of intense sort of mentoring and support with behaviour. We look at working closely with the school and looking at putting rewards in place and looking at times when they can come in for some extra support around their qualification, particularly obviously leave for year 11 leavers. We were looking at April, May time, giving that additional support so they could achieve their qualification with us. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Any other questions? I've just got a question really, and it's about to sort of understand the forecasting figures. I assume these are, although working regionally, these are Monmouth figures on here. What are the equivalent percentages to those that we know are NEET, those who are out of work? And I suppose to understand the attrition levels really in terms of those going through to qualifications, those are employment and potential drop-offs. So we have a bit more clarity around the forecasting, if that's okay, please.
Okay, thank you. We've, in terms of percentage of NEET, we have set targets within our NEET strategy, which will link to these performance. It is, we're very favourable in looking at the performance figures have been quite effective, and there was only 8 young people who left year 11 last academic year that were NEET, so it's very much in line with the NEET strategy. I hope that answers your question.
So the figures are quite low anyway. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Figures are relatively low, but we shouldn't be complacent either.
Okay, are there any other comments then at this stage? No. Okay, the recommendation is for the committee to consider the request for additional match funding from the Invest to Redesign services for 18-19 and base budget consideration from 19-20 from 2019-20 to 22-23, offering recommendations which will inform the cabinet. I think the issue of risk that Councillor Feakins raised, I think, is a point that we would like you to consider. But are we all happy that that we support this particular proposal? Yeah, all in favour? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Becker. So, yeah, great, thank you very much. Okay, item number 7 then is the Abergavenny Borough Theatre. Just wait while some other officers come through. Okay, thank you very much. You've obviously all read the report. Kath, do you want to give just a brief background to it, please? Thank you.
Thank you. As you can recall, a decision was taken back in sort of February time, really, for the Abergavenny Borough Theatre to come back into the authority. We've been working with the theatre since then in relation to how we actually put them on a sustainable footing. We've been scrutinising the situation on a hourly basis, I think is probably fair to say, and we've come up with some proposals really that are within the medium-term financial plan. It's become very clear to us that we need a full-time theatre manager there in order to really to move things forward and actually to take it forward to the next stage in terms of drawing in additional funding, in terms of putting it on a more sustainable footing and looking at the more medium long-term future of the theatre. Initially we were looking to make a decision within 6 months, but it's quite a complex situation there in terms of moving accounts over, etc. It's it's going to take us a little bit longer than that. We also want to consider the development of a formal charter, really, with the former Borough Theatre Management Committee, who are called A4B, who are a very strong voice within the theatre and actually represent all the local theatre groups. So we really want to work with them in terms of understanding what their requirements are and how that fits into the future plans. We've been providing some day-to-day support from the events team that Tim heads up, and really looking in terms of the management, some administration support, and how we actually move all the systems over onto our systems, and also take into account the issues that were raised as part of an internal audit back in January 17 that was done with the Trust. There's some indications there in terms of the SWOT analysis of the Borough Theatre that was actually undertaken as part of the business plan with the Trust that we've actually updated. We've had some positive news in that the Arts Council for Wales have been very supportive in the initial conversations that we had with them. We've had a funding bid approved for 14,000 to replace the lighting and the sound equipment. This is great for us, not just from the fact that it's a funding, but it's also really good the fact that A4B are providing the match funding support for that, which demonstrates their commitment. It will also enable us to reduce costs in terms of the hire that we're having to do at the moment to counteract the poor equipment that we've got, and actually opens up some real conversations in terms of wider opportunities with the Arts Council in terms of business planning, audience development, and also opportunities for capital refurbishment of the theatre itself. The seating isn't in the best place, and in terms of it's basically fallen apart, and we really need to address that, and we're hoping to do that as part of the wider refurbishment of the Market Hall facility, hence our real sort of need to put things on a more sustainable footing. Our finance colleagues have taken a good look over the theatre, and as far as they believe at the moment, we're out of immediate danger, but obviously there's a lot of work to do. We're not home and dry at this moment in time. However, we feel that with the tighter procurement controls, the fact that we're working far more closely with staff in terms of improving productivity, and more importantly reducing overtime costs, which we're starting to understand how those occur now, and the fact that we've got the direct link with the events team is also helping in terms of increasing footfall and turnover. Our communications and engagement team are also working with them, which is helping improve the publicity, and also we're doing a lot of work in terms of financial viability planning, in terms of actually understanding the cost of each programme event that we put on. So really it's to discuss with you the opportunity to actually take on this full-time manager with support in front of house supervisory staff that will help really give indications that we do feel this is moving forward in the right direction, but will also enable us to put the theatre on a more vibrant, creative footing in terms of the programme that's desperately needed at the moment. The team really do need a good dynamic leader, and we feel this will help in terms of addressing that issue. So open to comments.
Okay, questions then? That's particularly Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious about the financial viability of theatres in general, this size, this kind of town. Is there any benchmark data available? And are you seeing in this sector closures or financially viable businesses in other towns of a similar nature? Thanks.
I think our data really comes from the Arts Council for Wales in terms of their support for the theatre, which has been very strong. I'm not aware of theatres that are closed, and a lot of them are funded, and it is recognised within the industry that they do need financial support. Obviously the grant that we're putting in is helping us do that. We feel the grant at the moment is enabling us to sort of get it on that sustainable footing, really. Is it ever going to generate sort of thousands? Unlikely, but it's not the nature of the beast, really. It's very much a community facility, very much a focus for community arts development. So it's very much about the social and well-being of Abergavenny, really, in terms of the options that it provides for them. Also, the size of the theatre is bigger than the other theatres in the town. It has had a reputation in the past of being one of the best. The audience figures are strong, so we feel we can take it forward in a more sustainable way. It's just making sure we understand the operations properly, and we didn't feel we could do that within sort of a 4-month period, really. but we do feel it needs that figurehead to drive that vision forward, really.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Roden? Are you happy with that? Yeah, okay. Mark, do you want to clarify a point there?
Yeah, I was just going to explain largely as a consequence of your point in terms of benchmarking information. I suspect the closest comparator to it in the vicinity is something like the Congress Theatre in Cwmbran, which runs quite successfully, largely through a volunteer structure and a limited number of full-time members of staff. I mean, it's interesting that finance get mentioned in dispatches about the looking at the business case. I think it's probably not without a degree of confliction, to be honest, that we look at this, and we've had some quite interesting debates, myself and Kath, about the way forward with it, acknowledging that we took it back on from a trust that was designed solely to look at this, and we were tasked with actually looking at whether we could make a viable model for the benefit of the electorate in Abergavenny. I absolutely take the point that actually you need some professionals and experts to help you design that aspect, and actually whilst it was originally suggested that we would be able to come back with that viability assessment within 6 months, I think it's a very pragmatic conclusion that was drawn that actually we need a bit of help with that. Probably the risk for members is that after you've employed additional staff, if you then find that it's not a viable model, you've then got an additional severance consideration to you. But I think members approached it from a point of view, well, if we could make this work, we would like to. So I would just offer that perspective to you.
Okay. Councillor Becker?
Yeah, I mean, on the subject of the health of theatres, really, yesterday at the Lower Wye Area Committee, we had a briefing from James Woodcock of the Business Insights team. They've actually identified the arts and theatre as being one of the growth areas in the county. So whilst I'd agree we're probably not going to see this turn into some sort of new West End in Monmouthshire. At the same time, it serves a purpose, and that environment is healthy. So yes, there is a risk of an extra severance package when you've got a manager in, but if we want to do this, and I get the feeling from other committee members that we do want to do it, we want it to be a success, then we should have the manager in there to do it. So I think it is a positive idea.
Councillor Strong first, sorry. Councillor
Kath
Davis.
did mention the refurbishment. Have you got any idea of costs as to what it's going to affect the authority?
We're really working on the grant that's available at the moment from the Arts Council, which is about 280,000. We'd obviously have to match fund that, so we're looking at ways in which we can do that. It is in a situation where we desperately need to do something, because clearly the state of the theatre is not going to encourage the increase in turnover that we need. I think it's very positive, the fact that the Arts Council have appointed a London-based theatre architect to actually work with us. We're aligning that with the wider work that's going on with the Market Hall, but we will be coming back once we're clear on those costs, really, and as to how we're actually going to fund that, yeah.
Councillor Davis?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm very supportive of this sort of facility. I think, they're needed within our communities, and it's not all about making profit. It's about, what they actually give to the community itself. And you did answer part of my question, because you say it's used a lot for the community. And I think, that's one aspect of all our facilities, including schools, that we really need to look at, that we are maximising the benefit for the community. So, regardless of the profit, it's very nice if it made millions of pounds, but I suspect it's not going to. I think as a council, we really need to look at all our facilities and ask ourselves the question, are we maximising the benefits for the community in general? Because we have some fantastic, or we will have some fantastic schools with fantastic equipment in them that could be used to train people. Youths are perhaps having difficulty finding work. I realise there's an implication for resource there, but I think if we're going to tackle some of these main issues, we need to maximise the use of the community facility, and you have my full backing. I think it's essential that we get on with it. Thank you.
And I think just to add to that, is to ensure whatever programmes are developed, there's a broad range of programmes to suit all ranges of the community. I know there's been some criticism of some assets in the county where the artistic focus has been very niche or been to a particular demographic. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Davis, in terms of and our schools and our young people. What's the offer for them? Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Brian asked the question I wish to raise in part. I see the need for these theatres, ideally, within the area. But I think almost in a way like Caldecott Castle and like we're looking at here, the thing that worries me greatly is looking forward, what is our commitment going to be in terms of not only bringing these places up to speed in terms of their condition and workability, but also keeping them there. And I think perhaps there are occasions when we get over-enthusiastic about what we want to do rather than what we should do, bearing in mind what we've got to work with, if you like. And so I do really worry about the fact that we will go down the route with the theatre in Abergavenny without giving it the really closest of scrutiny in terms of what we are going to have to find in terms of hard pennies to bring that place up to speed and keep it there. And when we know that, then be realistic about the revenue that we can get out of the theatre. I think it's time to be really, really hard-nosed about these things, because it's the public's money that is got to pay for it at the end of the day. And God knows we're strapped enough for money as it is.
Kath, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. We've actually put on that we would come back for 6-monthly updates, really. But if something comes up that requires scrutiny earlier than this, I'll certainly liaise with Hazel and get it on the agenda, because it is really important that you're aware of what's going on there. And it's an unfolding picture for us at the minute, but that's the analysis we have to date, and we felt it was important to bring it to you as soon as we could.
Thank you. Councillor Devi, can you just put your microphone off? Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow on to something that Kath said, which I'm aware of another venue within Abergavenny. You said other theatres, plural. So do we have more than the two? And also, how do we fund the other venues?
The other theatre is the Melville Theatre. Yeah, which we don't fund, do we? No, we don't fund the Melville Theatre. Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a question on governance and just to understand where the current trustee board is that in the process of being wound up now? Has it been wound up?
It's a question we get asked regularly, actually. As far as we're aware, the understanding we took the theatre back on was the understanding that they would wind the trust up. There has been a delay in terms of moving the accounts over, because clearly when it came into the authority in April, it was year end, so it was at a very frantic time for finance. So the plan is to have everything over to us by the 1st of September. So I'd expect to see the trust winding up sort of sooner after that. We haven't been told anything any different to that anyway.
So they're not, are they sitting on any finance that hasn't been transferred already? They're not sitting on anything any particular ring fence grants that they've been given that they're sitting on that?
Yeah, I'm not aware that they've actually got any ring fence grants. Looking at the accounts, they have got a balance in the trust bank account. What will happen is we will do a reconciliation of transactions and ensure that we only pay for expenditure that relates to the running of the theatre after handover. Any balances then, I assume the trust will use up on any outstanding expenditure they've had, like legal fees, finance fees, accountancy fees. They were fairly, when we had the last meeting with them, I'm sure they they thought they had some large legal expenses that would nigh on use up all their balance. So your question is, I don't think anything will come across from the Borough Theatre Trust, but we won't owe them any money.
Will we get to scrutinise those final accounts in terms of what was spent where, or is that within our remit, or is that just within with the charity commission? You know, they'd have to have sign off, etc. I don't know.
I can't see there being a problem of their accounts haven't been finished yet, but I don't see it being a problem that us going through it this committee, just to show how they did.
Are there any other questions on this now? No? Okay. So in terms of recommendations then, that the select scrutinises the situation analysis and options appraisal and considers the proposal to recruit a fixed term full-time theatre manager with support in front of house supervisors be resourced from within the approved medium-term financial plan in order to put the theatre on a more sustainable, stable footing and determine the medium long-term future for the theatre. And 2.2 is that the select committee considers the development of a formal charter or Concord Act with the Act for the borough, or the A for B as we call them, the former Borough Management Theatre Committee. I think we're all agreed that it's an important community asset, as these assets are in the county. And we want to see it flourish. We want to see, it generate the outcomes of cultural well-being for our residents. Are we all happy with the approach? Yeah, can I show of hands for favour in that? Yep, all agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Kath. Thanks, officers, for that. So item 8 then is next steps, events and special projects. I think, Kath, you're going to lead on this again. Thank you.
Thank you. As we're aware, events has been back to scrutiny, or in front of scrutiny on several occasions, and also in front of audit committee most recently. My role really was to appoint an independent events review, which would then consider options in terms of underpinning a forward plan for the future events strategy. We've considered various options which are detailed within the report, and have really come to a conclusion where we feel a hybrid option would be the best. In terms of actually putting the team on a strategic and stable footing. Just to walk you through some of the conclusions, really. In terms of the actual audit, when we appointed the review, it's basically to look at the in-house team and to produce an analysis, to undertake some local stakeholder consultations with a view then to provide an analysis for us whether it was better to divest or to actually, and the impact that would have on our tourism visitor numbers, or to look at a forward strategy that would provide us with some strong direction, really. The findings of the review in terms of the positive impact that events can have on an economy like Monmouthshire were striking, really, in terms of how it promotes the area. And I know last year in terms of the Little Mix concert, the outputs that were achieved in terms of social media likes and, promoted quite a frenzy, really, in Monmouthshire. Clearly that boosted our local economy as a result of the increased visitor numbers, which therefore boosted associated spend. It put us on a positive platform in terms of national and local media, and as a result, clearly our local supply chain had to respond to this, and that generated income for them, and it's also provided opportunities for involvement from local community in terms of volunteering, etc. Tourism obviously generates tremendous amount of money for Monmouthshire in terms of £1.635 million, and obviously a major event can create a buzz for a number of weeks afterwards. We've looked really at the findings of the review, and there are some general conclusions really in terms of was mentioned earlier in committee really in terms of there was a loss which was regrettable last year, but however it was an ambitious programme, and what we've learned now is to put those lessons in place going forward, where perhaps it would be one large scale event with smaller events as opposed to trying to run too many at the same time, but also making sure that we increase our event visitors to increase the output into the county. There are some internal procedures that we need to follow, hence why we now have a very close relationship with our financial colleagues, really in terms of our robust checking of ticket sales, budget updates, etc. And I would say a lot of this learning now is being transferred over to the theatre, so one is actually benefiting from the other. It's really making a big difference really in terms of how we're learning. It's also in terms of procuring suppliers and how we sort of take that forward, and really how we improve our communication and engagement. So all of those points have been taken on board in terms of lessons learnt. So with the events promoter that actually did the independent review has worked with a number of authorities, and he came up with sort of several options really. One was literally to retain the current team but to take all the financial risk, obviously taking into account consideration of the lessons learnt. We felt really that still meant that we would take it, the council would be taking the full financial risk, and we felt there were opportunities to look at other options. Clearly we could just elect to hire out the castle, but then the difficulty with that is that we would also lose control. We'd have, it would be up to them as to what concert they put on. It might not be felt appropriate. We could look at procuring, but if we procure, clearly that there's a tremendous cost that comes with that, and again we lose control. We could look at partial sponsorship. Obviously, this would reduce risk, but it's really, again, down to reputation, loss of control there. We can work in partnership on a joint venture. That's come forward as an option for us, and, there are opportunities for us to do that. We can also work with outside partners, for example, Chepstow Race, of course, Celtic Manor, Monmouth Show and Us Show. So there are options there, really. So having looked across those various options, we felt really that it would be a better solution to actually sort of cherry pick the ones that were best for us going forward. So we've come up really with a hybrid solution, but really making sure that we implement this financial viability template, that we actually do all the finance prior to actually taking on the event to ensure that it works for us, and we're using that model again at the theatre. Really then we can actually then look to reduce the risk but improve the commercial opportunities, but enabling us to be far more proactive and to offer a flexible approach. So we put that in a table for you to simplify matters. In terms of the hybrid option, we feel it's going to be beneficial to us for many reasons really. It'll allow us to income generate, which is what we want to do, and also increase the numbers to council visit attractions, and similarly those that may go over to Monlife, the alternative delivery model. Also, the fact that we've been working more closely now with the theatre has enabled us to look at the how we make better use of our other locations, such as the Market Hall and Brewery Yard in Abergavenny. We have plans there in terms of potentially an ice rink in the winter, and also looking at various, we're doing joint events with the food festival as well, so there's options for us to work with wider partners. We feel really that the development need approach that's taken with the Abergavenny Theatre is working very well in terms of the expertise that we're able to share. Although what I've learnt very specifically is they're very different industries, compatible but very different. The partnership working that we've been looking at, really, we're having people come to us. We're actually looking at on very much an opportunity by opportunity basis. There also something that's become very clear is the professional support that community projects need, but also the professional support that our internal services need as well in terms of putting on corporate events. And also it's making sure that we're working in line with our event safety advisory group. Tim and the team have played a big part in the Velathon recently, and also the Run for Wales at Mega. We put on an event there. So it's very much getting involved in the community and using the expertise that we have in-house really to improve the external events that are coming into county, and to make sure that really we put on the best show. We did a GovTech launch actually at Caldecott Castle on Monday, which is with Cabinet Cabinet Office, and that enabled, again, Tim and the team to actually put on a really professional event, which made us look, which made the authority look good, and that's what's really important. So in terms of strategic alignment, we've also been working with our tourism department to ensure that any monitoring evaluation we do aligns with the destination management plan, and to ensure that we're looking at a coordinated and strategic programme of events that will also align with the requirements of the destination management plan. So in terms of budget, we've looked at this from all ends, and we do feel there's a need really to request an annual base budget provision. In the past, it's been very much, as Dave would view, a surplus budget or an income generating budget. Whilst in theory that sounds great, the reality is that the team itself can't be constantly income generating, because we're also doing community events or working with corporate events as well, which therefore has a knock on in terms of time. So we've been looking at the funding really. It's requested clearly that we look at some, to write the budget, that there is funding provision through the underutilised redundancy provision, but then sort of an annual base budget really to enable the team to be put on a firmer, more strategic footing, and actually to offer a service across the authority, which has been difficult in the past. So yeah, ready to take questions now really as I gallop through that.
Okay, thank you, Kath. Questions then, Councillor Feakins?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kath. I'm definitely in favour of the hybrid model in absolute terms. We talk about risk. Risk can come in many forms. You've got reputational, financial, health and safety, well-being and community, asset risk, and then Kelly's one, risk of doing nothing. I think we need as a council to understand that risk, and some of those will be weighted in different in different areas. I think in order for us to take on any project, we need to first of all understand what the risk is, in what area it falls, and you could almost do with a matrix to say you would go through a list of those risk factors and you would give them a score, and then if the score overall was above or below a certain line, that would tell you whether we thought that the overall risk associated with that that movement would be acceptable to the council. And I think it's understanding the risk really is prima facie, and I think that we then as a council need that buy-in once we know what that score is and we understand how that risk has been looked at and how that risk score has come into being. That enables us to buy into that project, because if there's an area of risk which we haven't considered, or which then later in the day says, oh, well, we didn't think about that, or the risk was too great in that one area, as has been the case in the past, then it catches us all out. Whereas I think if we all got buy-in at the front end, I think that we're all on the same page moving forward, and that'll stop that slap-in situation what we've had come previously.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're looking at we have a financial viability template. In terms of risk, clearly part of the reason for the overspend last year was the increased security as a result of what had happened in Manchester prior to the event taking place. So you're quite right, there are various different factors that we take into account, and that's something we do internally as a team when we assess each of the opportunities. Happy to put that together into a risk matrix that we can use, and we can certainly add that into the Cabinet report for next week if that would be helpful. So thank you for that.
Councillor Davis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Once again, Councillor Feakin and myself are speaking from the same hymn sheet, which is not unusual. And I wrote two things down about one was selective. We need to be selective in what we're doing. And the other one was controlling risk, and Councillor Feakin has described it far more eloquently than I could. And obviously this goes in with the need for the new management structure, which I think everybody recognises. But I think we need to be realistic here, that the overspend is considerable. So it's going to take time to get that back under control. And I think that's probably the first objective of the ADM team. I do think that there's major potential in a lot of our sites, particularly Caldecott Castle, potential which has never really come to fruition. And in order to, make that potential into a reality, perhaps we got to be prepared to allow the ADM team to make decisions, albeit, you know, the ultimate responsibility comes back to the council, but there will be things that could be done on that site that could increase the generation of income quite considerably, I think. But we need to start thinking outside the box to do that, and perhaps that's something that is going to go on in the future. I mean, we've been talking, for example, about the cycleway from the Ministry of Defence railway site to the coastal path, and I've gone grey during the time that we've been discussing that, and you know, we spoke about decision making earlier on. I always feel that we seem to talk about things, and I know that there's Ministry of Defence, things are always complicated, I understand that, but I think we really need to push on with those things, because these are the facilities that people want, and if we're going to increase our generation of income within that site, then we really need to push on with things like the cycling paths and the coastal path development, and take full advantage of the facilities we have there. So yeah, I think the hybrid model is the way to go, but we have to be absolutely certain in future before we make any decision, and be sure that the margins are there, I think. Okay, thank you.
Mark, you want to make a technical point?
Yeah, just really recognising the role I play in the authority. I just wondered whether there's a bit more pertinent information for your consideration. The events function was volunteered to members on the basis it would help sustain our traditional offerings. In the last 3 years, it has actually made a loss in each of those 3 years. We are now suggesting that we actually move it to a core budget provision for the staff, which I think is not a problem, but I will actually just remind you that there are no neutral decisions for this council in terms of where you consider next year's budget considerations. You will be minded to actually inquire around some of these business cases around the level of income that is designed to result from these investments that you're intent to make, both the Borough Theatre and the events function. Because what we tend to do is that we volunteer these things as very much commercial decisions, and we often look at the private sector in terms of how they do things, but actually the public sector is a very different beast. We often, when we look at the success or otherwise of a particular initiative, we don't have the luxury that the private sector has to divest themselves quickly of some of these changes. We have a public duty in terms of the purse and the custodianship of stewardship. That means actually often we're encouraged to evaluate things on a slightly different lens. So where something was originally proposed very much on a financial basis in helping sustain the council, subsequently the events function is now morphing into something that is providing a good service to the community of that area, and that's a very different basis than it was originally proposed here.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Roden, I think you indicated you want to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just trying to digest that. It was very interesting. I think that we need to look to a hybrid form and look for long-term partnerships with the right kind of partners, with the benefit of sharing cultural exchange, so that the council execs, etc., can actually learn a little about the commercial side and vice versa. And the longer that partnership stays in place, the better it'll become. There was also the mention of reputational damage in the table that you presented. And I think that commercial partners are also sensitive to this. They would be very sensitive to this if you have the right partner. And I think that together you could come up with something much stronger than doing it by ourselves. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No? Kath, go on. Yep.
I just want to come back on Mark's point really in terms of the commercial focus initially of the team, which you're quite right clearly. I think also though part of the reviews has looked at, enabled us to identify where the lessons were to be learnt. However, having sort of spent a lot of time with the team, it is very clear there is a community and a corporate function to their role. And I think it's actually us actually accepting that it isn't just a commercial function anymore, and you're quite right to raise that. But that's been part of the review process. So I do believe that this hybrid option allows us to provide that flexibility really, but to actually, when we are asked to provide professional support to communities, that is exactly what we're doing. And when we are being asked to put on corporate events, that every service that gets involved with the team knows they're going to get that quality. So it's really just taking that on board. I take your point in terms of public-private, but I think we're also encouraged to be commercial, but I think we shouldn't forget the social aspect of what we do as an authority, and I think this is perhaps one of the forerunning teams that can perhaps be watched and monitored in terms of how that works out going forward.
Councillor Feakins.
Cheers, thank you, Chair. And just a quick question for Mark, really. Is there a better way that we could be pitching this to ourselves, or a better way of doing checks and balances which would cover off the issue which you just raised?
I think the aspect I'd highlight to you is that in the financial climate, local authorities will have to look at commercial activities to help sustain its organisation. What I'd encourage us to do is that there seems to be a lag between making decisions and actually understanding the consequence of those things. So, for instance, if we look at the private sector, I would have hoped that actually in doing that review, we might have had a prediction of the quantum that this is likely to raise for us if the financial aspect is still important to this authority. So it just feels that our annual budget process at the moment probably doesn't help us in relation to giving us the time to consider how best to embed these within the organisation. And actually my experience in the past about some of these innovative stuff is they're given a better chance to succeed when they're embedded within the organisation rather than perceived to be at the side of the organisation. So both the aspects around the Borough Theatre and the events, I think, is quite encouraging to onboard them within the function. All I'm trying to do is to remind people that actually there was a commercial and financial aspect to this, and in making these decisions now, please be encouraged to remind officers to come back and tell you what the consequences are.
Very happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to come back, Matt? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, could you come back?
Just to say that we've talked about reputation a lot. We are very, very blessed in Monmouthshire to have some incredible spaces. You know, one of the main ones we've used over the past few years is Caldecott Castle. That site has grown from a very small event we did within the internal walls 4 years ago to 15,000 people last year in a space that we spent 2 years creating. We couldn't have sort of fitted the infrastructure in that space 2 years ago, and it's taken that time to get that place on a level where it's ready to have that kind of calibre of show. That's what we'd like to do around the county, not bring masses of people, but prepare our sites and get them in the best possible place to not only just maximise income and generate cash for us there, but to also offer them as spaces for the community. The Borough Theatre is a key facility at the centre of Abergavenny. The Corn Exchange and the other rooms inside there, we're looking forward to the funding and how we can change those. How can we make them more accessible to the community? But also, there's not a show in every night. So what else can we use those spaces for? A, for the community, but B, to generate that income. Places like the castle, we know they have sensitivities, which is why I believe, and I think we believe as a team, is it's key that we have oversight. Events are a massive part of day-to-day life now. We're getting more and more events through ESAG that are coming in. Communities are wanting to put on their own events, and people are wanting to come and use our beautiful spaces, and we have to be very, very careful about who we let use them, and to ensure that actually what we're allowing to come into the county will be for our benefit. You know, we know that a massive rock and roll concert in the middle of Abergavenny or Monmouth on a Sunday afternoon is not going to work. We know that certain concerts will work at Caldecott and certain won't. We have to maintain our reputation, and that's key. And by having this team, we're hoping that we're going to enable us to bring a lot more into the communities, into the county, but do it in a way that protects us, but also promotes what we're about in terms of community well-being, but also showing off the wonderful assets that we've got. We have a great reputation. We work with some fantastic companies and have done last year who've been through you know, this situation over the past few months, and since last summer. They're still with us, and they're still very much saying, what can we do? These are huge event industry partners who are key to get back involved with us, because they've seen you know, the quality of what was delivered last summer and in previous years, and they want to get behind us and to see us do more in our communities, and the community want to see more going on as well. So hopefully through this hybrid model, we're going to be able to cover a lot of bases, not just the commercial side, but corporate events, presenting ourselves well as a council to the rest of the world and to incoming sort of partners, but also really engaging with communities, helping them to deliver events, not doing it for them, but enabling them, supporting them, and helping them to do more in their area for their communities. So, thanks.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, observations? Councillor Dovey.
Just one, Chairman. It is about events, and it is really having there is an element of the community that always loves events, and that element changes according to what event it is. But I would urge, and I'm sure you do it anyway, but I want to say it. We have a great event place in and on the edge of Chepstow, which is the racecourse. I am at the moment dealing with problems with people in Gloucestershire, believe it or not, up in Sedbury and around that area, complaining about the noise and what turned into an absolute nightmare at one event they had recently. And we've had other events that have gone back over the months. And all I'm basically saying is you've got to be careful about looking after the environment for the people that don't want to go to events. They just want to live peaceably in their homes, and are perhaps prepared to put up with these events, but they have to be policed properly, and the sound levels and the waste and the rubbish and all that sort of thing is a big element of doing these. So as you move further into having more of them, you really want to make sure you're policing over these sort of areas of events is really on the button.
Yeah, so that's one of the big things we've been doing over the past year as an events team. We have been putting into place, as you know, we've not had any large-scale events this year to kind of work on, so a lot of our work streams have been working out how we do things better. And as more spaces come in to our portfolio, particularly with the council this year, we've rewritten a whole new noise management policy, which every incoming event now has to adhere to. We are putting these strategic measurements in place to ensure that everybody who experiences that event, whether they want to experience it or whether they don't, has the best possible experience they can. That we notify the people around the area of what's going on, what to expect. If road closures are going to happen, that they know about them in plenty of time, that we are enabling people to get in and around their communities. So it's quite important for us, which is why we want to maintain responsibility kind of county-wide, is to check what is coming in to our county. Is it going to be beneficial for us? Are the public going to enjoy it? If they're not, how do we best help them? And it's actually maintaining a year-wide perspective, saying, you know, how many events have we got in a certain venue? We don't want to put another large-scale event on in this venue because actually the community's had a lot of them this year. It's all about that sort of longevity and the planning, and really making sure that we do those things well, because we do have people who live near our sites who they naturally have a garden that's close and they can't sit in their garden and enjoy a peaceful afternoon when there's a large scale event on. So we really have to be very careful about that, and that's certainly one of the things moving forward, is that we're going to ensure we do well, and we will continue to do, is to serve everybody who participates or is on the edge of an event.
Obviously we're striving to be the best in class, if you like, with regard to these measures that you're going to put in place. Are you making sure that our environmental officers are up to speed with what we are doing, so they can be requiring the same standards from other businesses? It won't be so direct this time. Other businesses within the area, so that they comply with the high standards that we require for the events that we we run. I know it's a sort of fly-off, but it is important that we make sure that other businesses do what we do ourselves.
Yeah, so all of particularly the noise management documents have now been written in line with Mike Richardson, who heads up environmental health and noise pollution. We know that in the past, relationships with inter-council sort of partners and also other elements of the council, other kind of people like environmental health, ESAG, other departments have not been great, which is why we're really pushing for a much more collaborative approach to how we move forward with events, involving those officers, having those conversations, using the wide range of amazing expertise we have within the council to really maximise our outputs. So all of the new stuff we're doing, particularly at Caldecott, is done in line with environmental health. This is now available to every incoming event that comes in. They are given a pro forma that they're asked to adhere to. But part of what we want to do and are doing already is events that come into ESAG. We then go out and speak to them. We offer them assistance. We offer them help. We're now putting the toolkit that kind of part exists is what we want to roll out further, is making this information widely available to anybody who wants to put on a local event or a business event, that we can help them, that they will know the guidance that they do need to adhere to. We are really trying to make every effort to get everyone in line with how we need things to run, to ensure that we're protecting everyone.
It should be mandatory for them to conform with those standards.
It is, yes, yeah. So now we're getting everything on a level playing field so that they can have that information available to them, as opposed to finding out afterwards. So we're making every effort now so that they can and will abide to what we need them to.
Thank you for allowing me that.
It's okay.
Okay. We look to wind this up then. I think we all agree there's huge potential for for utilising our assets, not just for generating revenue, but delivering a really great suite of events and services for our residents and for attracting people into the county, which is important. We looked at risk. I think that's really important. Understanding the weighting of risk. A good point that Councillor Fegan's made, and I think that recommendation of creating a risk matrix for the forthcoming cabinet paperwork, I think that will be a recommendation of this committee. In terms of looking at the hybrid model, I think we're all there's consensus. I would say that the hybrid model is probably the best way forward in terms of sharing expertise and commercial knowledge, but having that sort of in-house ability to shape what we want. I think Mark's point about monitoring and justification of rationale is also really a point well made, because in the current financial climate, as you rightly said, we need to justify our investment decisions. So we certainly will be welcoming you back in the future, Kath, and your team. So the recommendation then is to consider the forward plan for events. We've offered comments and recommendations, I think, for the cabinet paper for the 25th of July, and around the hybrid option. The purpose of which is to put the events and special projects team on a strategic and stable footing. So I hope the cabinet will see the benefits as we have. So thank you, Kath. Thank you, team. Before we look at the last few items on the agenda, can I suggest we have just a 10-minute recess just to refresh ourselves? Okay, thank you. Okay, should we have just a few seconds to get ourselves back into place? Okay, thank you for returning so swiftly. Item 9 on the agenda then is the Performance Report 2017-18, Wellbeing Objectives and National Performance Measures. Richard, I think, is going to lead us through this. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So here to present report to you, reporting back against how well we did in 2017-18 against the wellbeing objectives we set as a council, and also to report back to you on some key performance indicators in your remit as part of an important nationally set performance indicator framework. By way of introduction to the report, I was just going to briefly run you through our performance framework, so where you understand how the information that is before you today fits within it, but also make you aware of the range of other information that's part of it that you have access to on an ongoing basis to inform your role as part of performance scrutiny. So I'll start off with Appendix 1, which shows you our performance framework. And you can see at the heart of that is our vision there, which is building sustainable and resilient communities. And that's the vision of the council. And we also share that with our partners who are part of the Public Service Board in Monmouthshire. And the Public Service Board in Monmouthshire, as members are probably aware, have set a wellbeing plan for the county. And within that, there's 4 objectives they're looking at to improve wellbeing in the county. And there's a number of steps underneath those, which the Public Service Board is now currently looking at developing actions to address. And obviously, as our council, we have a role as a partner in that, in delivering some of those steps. The next part of the framework is our corporate plan, which also contains our council wellbeing objectives. So the corporate plan was approved earlier this year, and that sets out a clear vision for the council up to 2022. It sets 5 priority goals and a number of programmes of activity for delivery by 2022. And those 5 priority goals are also our council wellbeing objectives, which is a requirement for us to set under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Now, the report for you today in Appendix 2 sets the wellbeing objectives, shows you the wellbeing objectives we set in 2017-18. Now, the corporate plan goals have superseded the objectives in front of you today. However, it's important, and we have a duty to report back on the progress we made against the objectives we set for last year being 2017-18. And those objectives were set shortly prior to the last council elections in March 2017 to meet requirements under the Future Generation Act of setting objectives by March 17. So the report for you today sets out the progress we've made against the objective, which is relevant particularly to this committee. There are 3 other objectives that have gone to other select committees. So it sets out the progress we made against the activities we set. Gives you an indication of some of the key performance information related to those activities. It shows you how they link to the goals under the Future Generations Act, and importantly then it shows you how some of the activity will continue to be delivered in the corporate plan. So very much some of this activity will then continue to be a priority focus for the council. And as you will see, a lot of the information there is probably what's formed part of your work programme as a committee throughout the year anyway. And that should be as no surprise to you really, because the objectives are focused on some of the biggest programmes and activities the council is looking to deliver. And so it's important when you consider your scrutiny of that today, you will have already had probably a lot more detailed updates on some of these areas, and in future you will have further updates, no doubtly, as part of your work programme. Things like broadband and things like LDP delivery, I know as a part of your remit on an ongoing basis. So this just sets out, and I think it's helpful to bring that together and for you today, how we've done against those objectives we set last year and the progress you made through the year as well. Another important part of the framework, moving on from that, is service business plans. So service business plans are where each of the council services, and we've got 49 business plans in total, set out an evaluation of their performance and activity they're looking to plan for the year ahead. Those are set over a 3-year time period to up to 2021. So it sets the activity they're looking to deliver, range of performance measures they'll look to use, which are a mix of some national performance measures and some more local performance measures that are relevant to services, and then how they're looking to manage and mitigate some of their key risks to the services as well. Those are updated quarterly. They are available on the hub for members to view, and I think I've previously circulated a note to members which shows you where you can access them, and obviously that provides a lot more detailed information and a lot more regular information in terms of how services are planning and managing their performance, so a useful tool for scrutiny members. And finally then, part of the framework, employee aims and objectives, obviously critically important then that the employees understand their fit and their contribution then for as part of their day-to-day work plans to the goals of the council. Around the outside, you'll see Appendix 1, you'll see a range of other drivers that will influence our performance framework. One particularly relevant today is obviously performance measurement, which is embedded throughout our framework. And Appendix 3 in front of you today brings together not many, but a few key measures that are particularly under this committee's remit that are part of a national performance indicator set that's used to benchmark council performance across Wales. So we haven't yet got benchmarking information for those indicators. That'll be published over the summer, and we'll bring the full benchmarking information to you for the full set back during a report we'll put together for council in September. And that report in September will provide a much broader evaluation of our performance, covering a range of areas such as finance, work on our assets, etc. But the basis of that report will be the objectives, which are part of which for this committee, the objective that's in front of you today in Appendix 2. So hopefully that's useful in a way of introduction. Happy to take any questions. I'm mindful it's covering a range of topics. I may not be able to give you all these answers to some of your questions, but we'll endeavour to get them. And I hope it's helped set the scene for you in terms of understanding how the work, the performance reports and work that will come for you throughout the year and ongoing as part of your work programme is linked to some of our strategic plans. In this particular case, the wellbeing objectives we set for 2017-18. So take questions.
Thank you, Richard. And just to obviously remind members that Richard probably won't be able to answer some of the more technical details around particular departmental, if you've got specific questions on those things. Richard's here in terms of data analysis and to give you sort of an overall view of general performance. So if there are any questions that are raised that do require that additional bit of expertise or knowledge from a particular department, then we'll try and get that information sourced and back to you. Okay, questions then? Any questions? No. Go on, Alan.
You mentioned the Public Service Board, and I understand that they've cogitated and talked for a long time about how they're going to meet these aspirations within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. When are we likely to see those action plans, and where will we be able to monitor the targets and the performance on a regular basis within the system? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I know you posed questions to the Public Service Board Select Committee, which answered some of those in terms of the process that the public service have put in place to now look at the action plans they're developing. And that committee received an update in terms of the work that's been undertaken by leads for each of those steps to now look at pinning down that action plan detail. And obviously the PSB Select Committee will have then a scrutiny role, and checking with Hazel and that's the case, scrutiny role in actually scrutinising the delivery of the PSB. In terms of our role as a council, obviously some of those actions will be relevant to activity we undertake as a council, which will contribute to the Public Service Board. Some of those will be set out within our corporate plan. Some of those may be more specific service initiatives that we'll set out in the business plan. So in terms of your scrutiny of the council's role in the Public Service Board, within the corporate plan there will be a framework in place for frequent monitoring of those activities, reported to you and evaluating of impact, and then also in terms of, I mentioned around the role of service business plans that are available to you as well. So those will be updated on a quarterly basis, and those should align to any activity we contribute to the Public Service Board, particularly in the business plans, should align then up to the Public Service Board. You'll be able to see in terms of our role as a council how we will then be able to scrutinise, and members will be able to scrutinise that delivery. And obviously then the council as part of the Public Service Board Select Committee have that broader scrutiny role of the Public Service Board activity.
Okay, thanks, Alan. I've got a question, Richard. Obviously the Future Generations Commissioner has tendered a piece of work in terms of the analysis and evaluation of assessments of public bodies' annual reports 17-18. What are our sort of big risk areas, I suppose, when that piece of research is done, in terms of drawing out where our weaknesses are. You know, what are those? I mean, we've obviously got a focus here on the E&D side of things, but where are those issues in general that, you know, we may be picked up on by the Future Generations Commissioner?
So right to mention that piece of work, and that piece of work, you know, really timely for us. As I mentioned, we'll be producing our annual report, which will be the first one under the Future Generations Act. So that'll be an annual report that meets those requirements, and the Commissioner in that report sets out 9 expectations that we'll look to deliver. So very much in that report to you, it'll come in September. We need to be mindful of those expectations and how we evaluate our performance in line with what the Commissioner says in terms of it applying the ways of working and contributing to the goals under the Future Generations Act. In terms of then the scrutiny's role of understanding, you know, celebrating good progress, understanding where we perhaps need to improve, the updates we're giving you here look at those activities of work that we set ourselves to deliver, and the Commissioner will look at the activity we set and evaluate then against the progress we've made in the year, and Wales Audit Office will also have a role in understanding that. So through this role, it's about those updates we provide you with, providing an evaluation of where we've done well and where we've met the objectives and targets and milestones we set, and also reflecting where maybe we haven't been able to do that, why we've been able to do that, why we haven't been able to do that, and then look to adjust our plans accordingly in future. So hopefully through the narrative updates we've given you, that gives you a sense of, you know, a balanced position in terms of what we've achieved, and then moving forward in terms of our wellbeing objectives we have set now through the corporate plan. The arrangements then for monitoring that corporate plan, similarly, we'll need to make sure that there's suitable mechanisms in place, whether that be through milestones, self-evaluation, targets to draw that out. And I think one point of sort of interest to the committee in terms of what the Future Generations Act sets us to do. The Future Generations Act sets us to look at maybe some of the more longer term programmes. Previous members of council are probably familiar with the term improvement objective, which is under local government measure, which still exists. So that requires us to look at continuous improvement in the way we plan and deliver our services. So that measure still exists, and obviously it's right and proper that we look to still do that. But in terms of then evaluating ourselves against the requirements of the Future Generations Act, these projects are offer some more longer term, harder, more complex problems to solve that would have to take a more longer term view in how we manage and evaluate our performance. That said, it's right, and of course you will challenge us on this as scrutiny members, for us to actually make sure there are suitable milestones and evaluation points in place to make sure we are on the right track of those longer term. So I can't say we've probably cracked all that yet, but I think we're working in that area, and of course we welcome your feedback in terms of making sure we're as clear and as council as we can be in our reporting as we go further into the realms under the Future Generations Act.
Okay, thanks for that response, Richard. I've got another question just in terms of the National Performance Indicators, PAM 17. Are we confident that the downturn there is predominantly down to the rebuild at Monmouth, and you know, it's something that's been raised here about excuse me, the depreciation of our leisure assets in some of our facilities. You know, they do require an upgrade, and you know that was, you know, one of the principal factors behind moving along the ADM route. Are we confident it's not just people drifting off because they're not happy with the offer, or it is predominantly down to the rebuild in Monmouth?
In terms of the analysis provided from the Leisure team, the comments reflect how they feel the performance has been for that year. I think point out of interest to the committee, really, obviously they set the target at 6,600 visits a year, anticipating that, as the comment set out, that the impact of the closure of Monmouth would perhaps be greater than it's actually been achieved. I think it's a good point to make sure that actually, obviously, we have got 3 other leisure sites in the council that contribute to this visitor data. But that's the analysis that they've given me in terms of how they understand that. And I know they're very active in terms of their promotions and use of data around memberships and things to have a real understanding about where their visitor numbers are, and also for financial purposes as well.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Any other comments, questions? No. Okay. So the recommendation is to obviously scrutinise how well the authorities performed against the objectives set for the previous financial year, and scrutinise performance measured using a range of national set indicators that fall within the remit of the committee. Are we happy that we've scrutinised that and questioned? Yeah, happy? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thanks very much. Okay, item 10 on the agenda then is the Revenue and Capital Monitoring 2017-18. And thank you, Mark, for coming forward to the table. And Mark's going to highlight some of the key points for us and then take questions. Okay, thanks, Mark.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to keep my doom-saying to a minimum, as you've obviously heard enough of that this morning already. This report reflects the outturn from last year, so to a certain extent that information has a degree of half-life to it in the fact that we can't actually control it or influence it in July the following year, but it is useful to you in your select duties in actually considering whether effective budget monitoring has taken place, to monitor the extent at which budgets are spent in accordance to the agreed budget and policy framework, to challenge the reasonableness of projected over and underspends, and to monitor the achievement of our predicted efficiency gains or progress with savings proposals. So the report is twofold in nature. It gives members a general overview of the financial situation as affected by the council, and then goes into some specific information around the economy and development portfolio specifically. So the general messages are that we incurred a net revenue outturn last year, which was a £650,000 underspend. Seldom do you find accountants using superlative words, but I actually think that was a fantastic achievement by service managers and directorate teams, given the what we were forecasted through the year. It feels like it gets harder and harder, and I always breathe a sigh of relief when we actually end up the right side of the line. But actually, just to remind you, a variance of 650,000, whether it be positive or negative, is still less than 0.5% variation against the budget of 143,000. So whilst it sounds a lot of money, in terms of actually getting the budget as close to that, I think has been a good piece of work by colleagues. Members were also asked to consider a capital outturn spend of £46.8 million. There's £11.8 million worth of slippage in that, largely related to the last year of the Future Schools programme. And members may remember that actually we're rebuilding Caldicot and Monmouth, and those are the most significant building programmes within the capital programme. It did result in a net underspend of 395,000. What I do at the end of the year is actually look at people's slippage requests and consider whether actually they are genuine slippage, that actually it's work in progress, and or whether it's actually in fact officers just trying to move money between years. And you may remember in previous meetings I'm quite passionate that officers actually spend the money that's been allocated to them by members in the year when it's actually been allocated. I actually think it's actually a weakness in terms of the degree of slippage and treat that as a performance aspect. But you can see the net underspend of 395 is detailed in paragraph 3.5.9. We talked earlier about some of the challenges for a local authority in the financial environment and commercialism. You might want to have a look at paragraph 3.23, which actually describes some of the flavours of that, and actually what I'm volunteering about the fact that we ought to be commercial and innovative, but we ought to, as a council, actually find ways that actually we can be timely, flexible, and divest ourselves of things that don't necessarily work as we anticipate. I won't repeat the explanation that the public sector has a different methodology than the private sector, and but we certainly should be looking to more of those commercial practices in terms of things like rate of return, and actually looking to sweat assets to drive as great a benefit as possible, because that will avoid us then having to adopt the more traditional cut and shut approaches when we come to traditional budget setting rounds. So specific to the committee starts at paragraph 3.33, which shows a net overspend for your portfolio of 217,000, made up of an aggregate overspend in enterprise of 275 and an underspend in public protection of 58. Of note within enterprise, economy and development ended up with a slight deficit. I think that's an artificial position, to be honest, because actually there's a saving from RDP funded expenditure that didn't occur last year, which actually masked the overspend in events. So you had a discussion about events earlier in terms of its viability. Planning and planning income reduced developments and income activities resulted in a £54,000 adverse position that our income wasn't as much as our budget. Tourism, leisure and culture that you're considering through the alternate delivery model incurred a £289,000 overspend, and it's interesting that 196 of that relates to the cultural attractions that, again, you were speaking about this morning around the castle, restructuring proposals, etc. On the end of paragraph 3.3 is the director's commentary, which is always useful from a service perspective in balancing up the simple financial situation. Paragraph 3.4 onward describes the savings progress for members in relation to the agreed proposals that you set yourself in the previous February for the forthcoming financial year, and I'm pleased to report that all the savings in relation to this portfolio were delivered in full. If you wish to look at any of the detail and remind yourself of those proposals that you agreed upon, they're actually in Appendix 1, pages 131 to 133. We talked briefly about the capital position overall. Capital for this committee is £2.5 million approved budget. There was £98,000 slippage, basically 3 schemes. A budget in relation to Carwent House, which involves it's not compulsory purchase, but it's our guarantee to the providers that are purchasing that building that actually, if the purchase price exceeds a certain value, that we will guarantee some of that. So obviously, that amount will roll forward until that purchase has been effected. And at the moment, I understand there's a degree of legal challenge and litigation with it, which actually is meaning it's taking longer than first anticipated. There's a £41,000 slippage in relation to the cattle market. Over the years, you'll appreciate a variety of remedial works that have gone on with the cattle market. That 41,000 relates to a last piece of work to be done in terms of separating the effluent streams, the animal effluent stream from the human effluent stream, which then... I'm not, but someone else is. The advantage of that is that then the animal effluent stream can actually find its way to land rather than in a combined basis that it has to be treated as waste. And then there's a small slippage to Woodstock Way, section 106, which I understand is a retention due on that project. Overall, there was an overspend in economy and development's capital programmes of 81,000. 70 related to the solar farm in relation to the costs incurred in actually creating the solar farm were less than anticipated in the business plan that was put together for members, which is a very good news story. And the other aspect is that despite the retention, or having done the calculation of the retention payment, there was an underspend on the Woodstock Way scheme of £12,000. I always describe to members in paragraph 3.6 capital receipts activity. I think it's important to remind people, largely because a lot of their aspirations around future schools are predicated on capital receipts activity. And our main challenge still remains the fact of getting those capital receipts in the years where we need them, because obviously in not doing so involves a degree of excuse me, temporary borrowing, which actually increases our costs. It would be fair to say that over the period of the next MTFP, we anticipate probably £4 million excess receipts over and above what we've included in the MTFP. But I do know that members have got a Tranche B Future Schools aspiration for King Henry, that at the moment we're still looking at the financing proposals, and clearly £4 million capital receipts is not as significant as much as the 32 million that we applied to the Tranche A Future School. So a lot of that will be borrowing, and actually the implications are for that will then need to be factored into the future revenue budgets in terms of being affordable to repay. Yeah. So paragraph 3.7 covers off reserves, both usage and slippage, and then results in paragraph 3.7.2 showing you what the balances are for both the year in question, and also provides you for a forecast for the end of this year. It's always useful to explain to members that there's two distinct categories of reserves. There's the council fund or the general reserves, and you may remember we've set ourselves a financial planning target that we will keep council reserves between 4 to 6% of net expenditure. And I'm pleased to report that that level sits just below the 5%, so that's in the reasonable category. Earmarked reserves, you don't actually need to hold earmarked reserves unless you have a particular purpose for them. They're ones created specifically for particular purposes, so actually that's not one of our financial planning activities. Although it would be fair to say that our earmarked reserves are declining at a rate that is faster than we're actually replenishing them. So the £653,000 surplus we made last year, we didn't add to the council fund, we used to replace and replenish reserves, and that detail is shown in 3.7.3, but you'll still see that actually this year earmarked reserves declined by £1 million with an anticipated further 1.5 million next year. The challenge for us is that whilst not all those reserves are used for the re-engineering of services, some are kept for risk management purposes, things like treasury equalisation and insurance provision. Those that will help us with re-engineering of services, which will be a common flavour for local authorities going forward in managing their budget process. There's probably not a lot of headroom in there to actually make that the reality. And obviously I'll briefly just talk that one or two of you may very well have a governorship in schools, so may be interested in the schools reserve position. The details on page 143. And encouragingly, despite a budgeted draw by schools of 880,000 at the end of the year, collectively they only utilised £94,000. So we ended the year with £175,000 surplus position. That's still not sustainable into the longer term in terms of appreciating that, again, that's a situation where we're drawing more on the reserve than we're actually necessarily replenishing. And the month 2 monitoring report in this financial year going to Cabinet, which will be on circulation shortly, might be of interest to members because it actually volunteers a strategy or approach to that, which actually better aligns schools' recovery plans with when they first identify the need for a deficit budget. And at that point, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much for that detail. Comments, questions, observations? Brian?
On the schools budget.
Sorry, Brian, is your microphone on?
The schools budget, in particular Chepstow School, that is on an upward curve, I believe, as far as progress is concerned. Perhaps you could let us know what's happening there.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased to report that actually at the end of last year, you may recall that's been a school that has been of considerable interest and concern to members, and actually they've had the head teachers and governing board representative in from time to time to actually understand what's going on. A recovery plan was put in place, and actually the end of last year, given the activities of governors, the head teacher and the bursar, they outperformed that budget recovery plan to end the year at £180,000 surplus. I think actually I'd make some comparison to the other comprehensive schools. At the moment, those positions look quite challenging. But given the fact that Chepstow recovered £400,000 deficit position over the space of 3 years, there is still a great probability that in a managed process, those schools will equally be in a recovery position. What I'm trying to do in better align the need for a recovery plan to the deficit budget is to give staff and colleagues the headroom to actually assess and make those changes rather than actually incur the administration over a 6-month period and create a hiatus between recovery progress and results.
Any other questions? I've got a question, Mark. You may be aware that there's, in terms of this committee's work streams, we're looking at a number of work streams, and there's a few outside workshops that we've undertaken on various different things, procurement being one of them. We had a very robust scrutiny session last Friday with chief officer for resources, and we went through the procurement strategy as drafted. I know there's further amendments to be made. The procurement savings that are listed here from the previous year are relatively small compared to what we're looking at in terms of a committee and the ambition that we have. I know at least one member was looking at least 2.5% of the overall budget, and there was other members that were looking probably more like 4%. Given there's only I think it was £100,000 in terms of procurement saving, and that wasn't met. What are the challenges in terms of realising that, you know, our ambition? And you know, I think there was quite an openness and honesty from the chief officer last week about some of the capacity in the organisation as is, and in terms of knowledge and know-how. But you know, this is what was listed in the paperwork is a really modest ambitious saving, and it wasn't met. I suppose to understand the reason why that wasn't met, but how are we going to make that step change to get to where we want to be as a committee and as a council, I suppose.
Yeah, I recognise that situation, that actually this year our potential or our presumption to drive savings from procurement is more significant than last year, and obviously I've reported that last year's wasn't actually met. I think there are some practical consequences as to why it wasn't met last year that I would actually hope, in terms of lessons learned, that colleagues take it forward this year. For instance, that saving was presumed corporately, but actually the reality is that those budgets are held within a variety of different directorates. In terms of the ownership and actually the need to be able to demonstrate where those savings have been made, given the fact that we have a team of probably 1.5 people involved in procurement, and probably they're most aligned to the repairing and building function rather than necessarily procurement more generally. I suspect there were capacity issues. Now, I wasn't here last Friday, but I could rightly expect that would be one of my colleagues' responses to you. I think we have to find a way of actually clawing those savings back where there's been a procurement saving. I mean, the difficulty I have in this is that it's very difficult to find some of those manifest savings. I mean, it's a large budget of supplies and services. It would be quite reasonable that actually, if you did things in an organised fashion and tendering arrangements, every indication of my training suggests that you can derive economies from it. It's just finding those economies and being able to quantify them for the benefit of actually showing that saving. Because most often than not, that presumption around those savings and changing working practice is also presumed within the directorate. So there's possibly a degree of double counting with some of those savings in the way that they are shown. I also think that probably there needs to be an evaluation of some of our national procurement work, because whilst everything tells me that the tendering and those arrangements should derive economies of scale, it's quite difficult for a service manager to actually satisfy some of those tendering arrangements, particularly where they're actually arranged at a national level. The administration involved in that is quite significant. And actually there's a question mark in my mind whether actually some of those nationally procured contracts necessarily provide the value for money that I would have anticipated. I mean, if I give you, for instance, around, say, utilities, that was agreed on a national level and involved, I think, in the end, it was about an 8 to 10% increase across the board. Yet I know that my personal bills, I look at my household, in terms of things like fixing things or things like that, you can actually derive lower value. We need to find a way of actually being more timely, more evaluative in our considerations, rather than actually being passengers to national frameworks. Unfortunately, I don't have the golden bullet or the way of doing it, and I think actually probably my colleagues are equally struggling with the practicalities of actually demonstrating this to members. It would be fair to say that in my month 2 report, I haven't yet regarded the savings from procurement as manifest like I did in the last year's report. So it's certainly going to be a challenge for SLT and Cabinet over the next couple of months there as to how they onboard that within directorates. That may necessitate pulling some of those budget back corporately so you can better identify them. And some of that dimension is already in existence around the corporate landlord and regarding buildings more corporately than at a directorate level. But it's not an easy prospect when the services also regard those changes as, if you like, their budgets being their responsibility. And actually, if you start taking savings from them, I have found in the past in other places that actually tends to reduce people's accountability. They think to themselves, well, why do I bother if these things are going to be taken from me? So I haven't got the answer of yet. I concede the point that actually there should be savings coming from procurement and the way we do things, but it's very difficult to actually be able to calculate those in an explicit fashion to you, unfortunately.
Yeah, I take your point, and I think that the driving factor that Peter put forward last week was there needs to be a collaboration of commissioning expertise right across the authority, and that it can't just sit with a couple of individuals who've probably just focused on performance and compliance. There needs to be a focus on this right across the right across the authority. And your other point about NPS, I mean, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but it's utterly hapless as far as I'm concerned. But you don't have to comment on that.
Well, at one level, I'm pleased that mine and Peter's evaluation is similar and consistent, and it may seem passingly strange for an accountant to say the budget is quite an artificial construct. We do need to find ways of actually being able to measure this holistically.
Councillor Becker.
Yeah, I wasn't at the procurement workshop, unfortunately, which is a shame because I'm probably going to cover some. It's paraphrasing what you're saying about the procurement, the devil's in the detail, really. It's actually finding those savings, and it's also the mechanisms of who's responsible, the granularity of who's responsible for actually trying to find those savings. We've talked before in the committee about if there was extra capacity, would that actually assist the situation? I don't know if this probably was covered at the procurement workshop, so you can educate me. In the sense that we could probably make as much money back from savings enough to pay for somebody to actually be more responsible. You're sort of saying that that granularity issue actually makes that less attractive. Actually, trying to put somebody in charge of going around and finding those savings.
I'm always loath to recommend you a cost because I know when it comes to the budget setting round, it's far easier to avoid a cost than it is often to find a saving. I did work in Torvine for a while, and they have a slightly different perspective in terms of having an individual that is responsible for a bit of a czar in relation to that, and there is more of a corporate responsibility in that fashion. I do think that actually our procurement function and the officers involved in the procurement function have historically been involved in the repair and the building dimension, and actually we probably don't have a great deal of expertise or capacity in some of the other large contract administrations. We rely very much on that being individual officers' involvement. So, for instance, on the utility side, that's covered off by the valuation team in their responsibilities as corporate landlords. So there are individuals doing things in a piecemeal fashion. I think what we need to do is actually use that expertise more collectively. I mean, for instance, social care have quite a commissioning arm. That's an element of tendering at one level, rather than the supplies and services aspect. But some of these things, irrespective of what the outcome is that you're looking for, involve very similar disciplines and foresight. And I think actually having maybe a working group across the council rather than actually start a bit of a virtual team rather than actually starting to actually change roles and actually adding in additional costs to the organisation well, I would say that as a counter, but would probably be an interim step that I'd volunteer before we consider that.
I knew you were going to come in on this, Alan.
I just think that, I think one of the things that we established, even though the words probably weren't said, that at the moment we don't really understand what we're spending and where we're spending it, because we haven't got the facilities to map that spending. So it's very difficult to look at a programme of, where we can make savings or whether we are getting the best out of the contracts we got if we haven't actually got a facility for mapping where the spending is taking place. So I think there's a body of work to be done before we actually move into what the initiative's going to be and where we're going to place the initiative. It's quite clear with the resources we got that we can't do that exercise, and that's why it's important first of all we use our internal resources. But it may come to the stage where perhaps we say, well, it's going to be worth us employing an external resource in order that we can maximise the savings, I think. Because the potential, from my personal experience, can be huge.
I agree with you. I mean, all the theory is that resource is there. It's a significant amount of money, and actually doing things in an organised fashion derives economies of scale, and therefore you ought to be able to take a saving out of it. I take your point about being able to quantify it. I'd probably suggest that actually the way that the ledger setups allows us to actually understand what these costs are, but perhaps the dimension here is we don't necessarily understand how we commission those services.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Councillor Devi.
I'd just like to thank Brian for mentioning Chepstow School. Love to put it on the record. For months and years, I had Chepstow School pushed down my throat in its deficit. And it is brilliant that it is where it is now. But having had my little chortle, I think what I do want to say is that to get rid of a deficit like Chepstow had and the other schools have now is no easy task. It really is no easy task. And the one fundamental decision, because I was on the retrieval group, if you like, was that I said when we got ourselves together that we would do nothing in terms of expenditure without referring to Mark first. Once he'd set the retrieval process in line and said what we should do, and we stuck to that all the way through, and we came out at the end. We're very fortunate in having Mark as an officer because he has a clear understanding. He has steely resolve when he wants you to do something, and he is. For me, he was a really valued asset in getting us out of the mess we were in Chepstow, and I'm pleased that I believe they are still practicing what he preached to us. And so if anybody from any one of the other schools who is on a retrieval process, the first thing you do is make a commitment to listening to what Mark says and abiding by it.
That's very kind of you to say, Councillor, and I do think my unreasonableness and tenacity is a bit of a double-edged sword for certain colleagues, but I think you've highlighted the point that actually probably the difference between success or otherwise was actually we often deal with as officers, we often deal with the head teachers and the staff. The financial responsibility for any school's situation rests with the governors, and actually using our energies most effectively is getting the governors on board, and it's them who delegate the responsibility to the head teachers. So once you've got the ownership of the governors, whilst not everything goes in your way in terms of a recovery plan, you are right, I smile about some of the conversations, but I mean, in years where we've missed the recovery plan target, it wasn't a case of resetting that recovery plan. It was what are you going to do in the next year, not only to recover last year's situation, but also to put you back on track. So to a certain extent, we regarded the recovery plan as immutable. And that was quite difficult for people on occasion. So I'd just like to show my appreciation to the governing body, Claire as the head teacher and Alison as the bursar.
Sorry, David, you have to. You just use your microphone, David. Sorry.
And we were fortunate enough to have a number of businessmen on the retrieval group, the like of Alan, you know, and just got it, and they understood what had to be done, and they really stuck to it. So it's great. It's a great weight off the shoulders of the school now.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
It's a different organisation, the Fire Authority. We've got what's called an innovation panel or something, suggestions coming forward from the staff. There was one astounding proposal. Somebody who knew how their job did, whatever, came forward and brought forward really, really substantial savings from somebody who's working there on the work surface. We can do this better, and that's a recurring saving that we make. Encouraging staff, officers to, if you've got a good idea, put it in, and there's a monetary incentive to do it. Is there scope to do this within the council? Because people have a job, they do it, but they perhaps think at the back of their mind, you could do this a better way. I know how we could get this service a better way. And we ought to use that total resource as we're doing with the Fire Authority. Some of the suggestions are remarkable and not applicable, but that one particular one, that was real big money, that it is a continuing saving every year from a staff member.
Our approach to budget setting, we always reflect on it annually, and if there are any lessons to be learned or different ways of doing it, then
a way of getting colleagues to bring forward their suggestions, something that seems so trivial to them, can actually really, really have an impact.
Yeah, we have in the past considered a suggestions board, and obviously you'll be aware of the fact that the way that savings are or have been communicated in the past is actually to set targets and actually expect teams to consider the situation and volunteer savings that they find most robust to them. So there's a degree of that, but actually I do question whether actually that comes a lot further down than the manager of the service and actually involves the members of staff specifically. There may very well be a good cause to have a suggestions box or something on the hub that volunteers this aspect, but as an organisation we are quite engaging, and we have tried it in the past but haven't found that much volunteer, but it's worthwhile actually turning over all stones, because I think this budget round will be quite difficult.
Okay, we all happy? Thank you, Mark. Thanks for taking us through that. Much appreciated. Item 11 then is the list of actions that arose from the previous meeting. I know action 1, Hazel's taken that forward with Matt Gatehouse and the Democratic Services team. They're going to have a look at that. ADM, we had Alan as vice chair, and I had a useful meeting last week with Kath Fallon, Ian Saunders about this and where our expectations were, and I think they understand our point of view, and I think we understood where they're coming from now. Our expectation is that we will be the overarching scrutiny committee, and there'll be the programme work will be coming to us in September, and we anticipate, and this will be on as we move on to the next item in terms of forward work programme. That'll probably be another sort of full day meeting looking at that. And another big ticket item, which is Welsh Government coming back in to talk about broadband. But we'll have a look at that in a minute. The City Deal appointment was made at the last council meeting the workshops have taken place in terms of Gloucestershire First, which was really useful. I think that was really productive. We've started to make relationships there, and I think we're going to explore through officers some of the areas around tourism as a potential first starter for reciprocal working. The procurement, Hazel, you've got an update on this, I think. I know we looked at the strategy last week, but we wanted an update, I think.
Yes, I think following the workshops that you've had, you asked for a sort of briefing note really on actions that have arisen from your workshops, what's been taken forward. So I've asked that be produced and be sent to you. So we're in the process of doing that. So we'll distribute that as soon as we've got it.
That's great, thank you. And 9, I think, is probably an error, is it? Item 9. Yeah, that probably shouldn't be on there. Okay, so item 12 then, the forward work programme. Do you want to comment on this, Hazel?
Yes, obviously we'd hoped to get broadband 2 for this meeting today, but that wasn't possible. So we've got agreement from Welsh Government to attend on the 27th of September. So the proposal is to put them first on the agenda, and then depending how long that takes, I'm guessing hour and a half maximum, then you've got the rest of the meeting to focus on the ADM work. The reason for the order is obviously external speakers, not necessarily just putting those first, but I've got no idea how long you want to spend on the ADM. It's one of those things you're just going to have to work through as you did last Friday. You know, it can take time, but it would be better to put that as the second item and possibly to extend that meeting over into the early afternoon. So we've booked the chamber for the day, but I'm not saying it's going to take you all day, but just to have that sort of flexibility really to take as long as you need to. And I would propose you don't put anything else on that agenda.
Colleagues happy with that? Yeah. The other update is that we've had the Velathon come back to us and finally engage with us and said they're willing to come in and be scrutinised on the investment that we've paid them for the events for the last couple of years. So we probably look. I don't know, October, maybe November meeting to look at that. They probably have an analysis of particularly this most recent event. But it's good that they're going to come in. Okay, so that's the forward work programme, and then item 13 is the Cabinet and Council forward planner. I don't know if there's anything there that you feel that we should be aware of as a committee. I think the point that was made this morning, the call-in, it's really vital that, officers populate this. So we're aware of, a few weeks in advance if there is a particular issue that does require pre-decision scrutiny, that we can call it in and examine it further. I think probably all that this morning could have been prevented if they had put it on the forward planner. We'd have seen it. We would have brought it in, and within probably an hour we would have that would have been resolved. But there we are. It's one of those things. Councillor Davies.
I think Hazel made a very good suggestion at the pre-meeting about, even though we couldn't have a full report, we could have some details off an officer about what was coming up, what decisions or what is likely to be put forward, so that we have some idea of when we want to look at it or not.
Yeah, I was just about to say really that, you've got lots of options available to you besides the call-in if you're aware of a decision that's forthcoming. So, I mean, you can ask for sight of the report. Any member's entitled to any report. But also, you could ask to meet with the officers, as myself and Councillor Davis and the Chair did the other day, to get a better understanding. And sometimes some of the questions you might want to ask and you get answers to and clarification might mean that you're satisfied that the decision is appropriate. So it can prevent a call-in as well. So the key thing is making sure that those decisions are on the planner in advance and taking into account the Cabinet member's point about timing. sometimes it is difficult with decisions that have to be made at short notice, and we understand local government decision making is quite protracted at times, but getting officers into the discipline of at least saying that a decision is due to be taken before the report's even been written is really helpful for us, because we're constantly checking that planner to make sure we haven't missed anything, and that's our role. So I think that point was made today.
Okay. Okay, item 14 then, the date of the next meeting is Thursday the 27th of September at 10 o'clock. Obviously we'll have our pre-meeting. Can I just thank all councillors obviously for their attendance today, but for all their work over the past few weeks. We've had a lot on. Workshops wise and in terms of committee, and obviously your participation and your input has been hugely valued. So can I just say thank you very much again, have a good restful summer, and we'll see you back as a committee in September. Thank you. Councillor Dovey.
One thought just went through my mind, and I apologise for being late. We were talking about the Velathon coming back to us again. I'd like to know whether we have, in the last council when the Velathon was pretty active, the question was always being asked, is this of value to us, you know? And nobody really grappled with that problem. People came up with a statement, well, you know, people see beautiful Monmouthshire with bikes going around it, and that will have an impact and all that sort of thing. I'd like to know whether any work has been done, because since they stopped coming, we've heard nothing from them. So I'd love to know if any work has been done on the impact of us being value for money, on the impact of us being involved with them again. Otherwise, I think it's pouring money down the drain.
Well, I think that'll be for the committee to really scrutinise over and pore over, you know, what we've spent, you know, what they've spent, and you know what the performance indicators were, what the performance benchmarks were when we signed the contract with them, and then to make recommendations to cabinet whether future we should be spending money on the event in the future. So
yeah,
I mean,
I just wondered
absolutely.
whether the council itself had done any work on evaluation that we could refer to before that.
Do you want to say anything?
Last year they didn't attend. We've been trying to get them in for some time. The previous year we invited them in to discuss the ROI, the return on investment, and I think members at that time had a full explanation of how the event had been managed and certain difficulties and how those were overcome. But we didn't have a clear sort of understanding of what the return on investment was specifically for our council against all the sort of the hosting and the responsibilities around that, and some of the sort of feedback from the public around road closures and so on. So we've asked them to attend and provide a detailed analysis of the return on investment for Monmouthshire. So that would be the purpose of them coming. So I would very much hope that that's what they will bring to you, and I'll be making that clear to them that that's what we expect.
The point I would make, I was trying to make, is when they come, as you've intimated, they're not the easiest of people to talk to and get the answers we want out of them. And a number of us, when we were involved previously, are requested from officers to find ways of monitoring how effective, for local business, this investment was. And it isn't a very difficult thing. You could speak to chambers of commerce, you could speak to local businesses and get an idea of where in the areas that they travel, maybe a wider area, what sort of impact it has, and this is beneficial to us. Because if it isn't beneficial, if we can't justify it from our own research, if it isn't beneficial, we shouldn't be doing it. And I definitely don't believe we should believe what they are telling us. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Councillor Strong?
Just a couple of businesses in Usk. I mean, Usk has been badly affected with the Velathon, with the road closures. I know that two businesses closed down on that particular day, and that probably results in £5,000–6,000 loss of earnings on each occasion. And there's another business which has told me that although this year was better than last, their takings were still down 50%, which is a lot of money to a small business. So I think that we do need to get them to answer the questions and to see whether I mean, it's difficult because it could possibly mean that there are a lot more cyclists in the area who are spending money at the for teas, coffees and whatnot throughout the year, and it's difficult to just work out exactly if it is a plus or a minus for the county. So it'll be interesting if we could get them in, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
That was why I was suggesting we should be speaking to local businesses along the routes and people that are involved.
Yeah. Well, I think that, as I said, that's the work that we'll be drilling down on, and we've got questions of officers as well in terms of their liaison and what reports they're getting back from the Velathon organisers as well. So I'm sure that would be a really a good piece of work to get our teeth into. So okay, happy. Thank you ever so much. Thank you.